The wind moves over Babylon before the sun has fully risen, passing across broken brick, dry grass, and the faint lines of walls that once seemed too vast to belong to ordinary human hands. In the pale light, the ruins do not immediately look like the centre of an empire. They look almost quiet, almost emptied of meaning, as if the earth has been trying for centuries to swallow the last hard edges of the city. Yet beneath this dust lies one of the most dangerous ideas ever shaped in the ancient world, that a city could become more than a city, that a king could build not merely a capital, but a meeting place between earth and heaven, and that human power might be able to arrange the will of the gods. Babylon is often remembered through fragments, a tower rising toward the sky, hanging gardens that may or may not have existed in the form later writers imagined, a great king who dreamed in stone, a feast before a sudden fall, a name that becomes a symbol of arrogance, exile, luxury, confusion, and doom. But the real Babylon is stranger than the legend because it does not begin as fantasy. It begins in mud, water, hunger, labour, fear, and belief. It begins in the flat riverlands of southern Mesopotamia, where the Euphrates bends through an open plain and where survival depends on the careful control of canals, fields, and seasons. Nothing about this landscape easily forgives mistakes. Too little water brings famine, too much water brings ruin. Salty soil can poison the fields, armies can cross the plains, cities can rise quickly and fall just as quickly. In such a world, order is never taken for granted. It must be built, defended, repaired, and explained. What makes Babylon so haunting is not simply that it became powerful. Many cities became powerful. Akkad, Nineveh, Thebes, Hattusa, Persepolis, Rome. The ancient world is crowded with capitals that believed themselves permanent. Babylon's deeper mystery is that it learned to speak the language of eternity while standing on ground that was always changing. Its builders used sun-dried and baked brick because there was little stone nearby. Its monuments were made from the earth itself. Shaped by hands, stamped with royal names, carried, stacked, plastered, and rebuilt again and again. A stone mountain lasts by resisting time. Babylon's temples lasted by demanding constant renewal. Every generation had to repair the sacred stage. Every king who wished to rule had to enter an old performance and pretend it had never been interrupted. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. Because Babylon's story is not just the story of a lost city. It is the story of what happens when politics, religion, architecture, and fear become so tightly woven together that no one can easily tell where worship ends and control begins. To understand Babylon's darkest secret, it is necessary to stand first in the silence after everything has vanished. The great processional road is no longer filled with priests, soldiers, musicians, and captured treasures. The temple courtyards no longer smell of incense, blood, oil, grain, and heated brick. The Euphrates no longer frames the same sacred landscape that ancient scribes described. The statue of Marduk, the city's supreme god, is gone. The ziggurat that later tradition would connect with the Tower of Babel has disappeared as a towering form, leaving argument, measurement, memory, and imagination in its place. Even the famous walls, praised by Greek writers as wonders, survive only in damaged traces and reconstructions. What remains is enough to prove greatness, but not enough to restore the living city. This incompleteness matters. Babylon has always been a place where evidence and legend press against each other. Archaeology reveals streets, walls, gates, tablets, inscriptions, foundations, and the scale of royal ambition. Texts reveal rituals, omens, hymns, economic records, king lists, prayers, and political claims. Later traditions add warning and wonder, but no single source gives the whole city back. Scholars still debate the exact appearance of some monuments. The reality behind the hanging gardens, the relationship between Babylon's ziggurat and later biblical memory, and the daily experience of ordinary people living under the shadow of sacred kingship. The evidence remains incomplete, and that incompleteness has allowed Babylon to become larger than itself. Still, enough survives to reveal the central pattern. Babylon's kings do not merely say they rule because they are strong, they say they rule because the gods have chosen them, and above all because Marduk, Lord of Babylon, grants kingship. This is not unusual in the ancient Near East, but Babylon develops the idea with extraordinary force. The city becomes a cosmic argument made from brick. Its temples are not only religious buildings, they are administrative centres, storehouses, landholders, ritual engines and theatres of legitimacy. Its festivals are not only acts of devotion, they are moments when the order of the universe is publicly renewed. Its gods are not distant abstractions. They are treated as living presences whose statues must be washed, clothed, fed, moved, honoured, protected, and sometimes returned from captivity like royal hostages. That last detail can feel startling to modern ears. In Mesopotamia, a divine statue was not simply decoration. It could be understood as the earthly body of a god, made alive through ritual. If an enemy seized the statue, the event could mean more than military defeat. It could suggest that divine favour had departed, that the city had been abandoned, that cosmic order itself had shifted. A god could be taken into exile. A god could return. A king could claim greatness by restoring a god to his temple. The fate of a statue could become the fate of a people. This belief gave religion enormous emotional power, but it also opened the door to something darker. If the gods had visible bodies, houses, schedules, possessions, and political preferences, then rulers and priests could claim to manage the divine presence. They could stage obedience to heaven in ways that also strengthened control on earth. Here the shadow at the heart of Babylon begins to take form. The city's secret is not hidden beneath one sealed chamber, nor written on one forbidden tablet, nor buried under the remains of a vanished tower. It is more subtle and more unsettling. Babylon's rulers learned that the gods could be made central to the machinery of empire. They did not invent divine kingship, and they did not control belief completely. Ancient religion was too deep, too serious, and too widely shared to be reduced to simple manipulation. But what survives in the record suggests a system in which sacred ritual, political obedience, economic extraction, and imperial spectacle reinforced one another. To serve Babylon was, in theory, to serve the divine order. To resist Babylon could be framed as resisting the order the gods had established. This is why the city's beauty cannot be separated from its threat. Imagine approaching Babylon at its height. The plain stretches wide beneath a burning sky. Date palms rise near canals. Fields shimmer with barley. Boats move along waterways carrying grain, timber, stone, metals, and people from lands far beyond the city's natural reach. Ahead, walls appear first as a line against the horizon, then as an enormous human-made edge between wilderness and order. Gates flash with glazed brick. Lions stride in coloured relief along the processional way. The city announces itself before anyone explains it. It says that power lives here. It says that the world has a centre. It says that the gods have chosen this place. And yet, every brick is vulnerable, every canal silts up, every king dies, every empire needs soldiers, scribes, workers, food, taxes, and stories strong enough to make people believe the burden is meaningful. Babylon's greatness depends on constant maintenance, not only of walls and temples, but of imagination. Its rulers have to convince subjects, allies, enemies, priests, and perhaps even themselves that the city's order reflects the order of heaven. When the illusion holds, Babylon seems eternal. When it weakens, the same theology that crowns a king can condemn him. That contradiction will follow Babylon through its entire story. A city rises from mud and becomes a symbol of cosmic authority. A local god becomes king of the gods. A ruler receives law as sacred duty. Temples feed divine statues while controlling real wealth. Astronomer priests rid the sky for signs that kings fear. Conquered peoples are moved across the empire in the name of stability. And in the end, when Babylon falls, the language of divine favour does not disappear. It simply changes hands. Another king enters. Another empire claims that Marduk has approved the transfer of power. The city that tried to rule through the gods discovers that gods, at least in political language, can choose someone else. For now, the ruins remain still. The first light grows stronger over the plain. The old bricks hold the heat of many vanished days. Somewhere beneath the dust are the traces of ceremonies that once made a city feel like the hinge of the universe. Babylon is gone, but the idea it perfected has not vanished as easily the dream that power can dress itself as sacred order, that empire can appear as destiny, and that human hands can build a staircase high enough to touch heaven. Long before Babylon becomes a name that can frighten prophets, impress Greek travellers, and haunt the imagination of later empires, it is only one place among many in a difficult plain. Its earliest importance is not obvious from the landscape. There are no protective mountains around it, no dramatic cliffs, no deep harbour, no natural fortress rising above the horizon. The land is low, open, and exposed, shaped by the restless courses of the Euphrates and the long human struggle to turn water into food without letting water become destruction. Babylon's first secret is therefore not grandeur, it is dependence. Everything begins with the river, and the river gives nothing without demanding discipline in return. Southern Mesopotamia is a world made by silt. Each flood lays down new earth, and each generation learns that fertility is never simple. The same waters that feed the fields can drown them. The same irrigation canals that bring life can leave behind salts that slowly weaken the soil. The sun is generous and merciless. Rainfall is uncertain. A field does not become productive because people merely scatter seed and wait. It becomes productive because communities dig, dredge, measure, assign, repair, and argue. In this landscape, civilization does not rise as a peaceful accident. It rises because survival itself becomes organised. The canal is as important as the temple, and in time the two become almost impossible to separate. Babylon's growth depends on this older Mesopotamian inheritance. By the time the city begins to matter politically, people in the region have already spent many centuries building cities, temples, archives, workshops, and systems of labour. Sumerian and Akkadian traditions have already shaped the world into which Babylon steps. Writing has already become a tool of administration and memory. Kings have already claimed divine favour. Temples have already gathered wealth. Cities have already fought over land, water, trade, and prestige. Babylon does not invent urban civilization. It inherits a crowded stage and then slowly learns how to stand at the centre of it. At first, the name Babylon probably does not sound like destiny. The Akkadian form, often understood as meaning gate of the god, gives later listeners a sense of sacred importance, though names can carry layers of history, reinterpretation, and political use. What matters is not only the meaning of the name but the way the city comes to embody it. A gate is a threshold. It suggests passage between one realm and another. For Babylon, this idea becomes more than poetic. The city will eventually present itself as a meeting point between human order and divine authority. But that image rests on very practical foundations: mud brick, stored grain, trained scribes, controlled labour, and canals cut through heavy earth. The city's material world is humble in origin, clay is everywhere, stone is scarce, timber must often come from elsewhere, so Babylon is built from what the plain provides most abundantly. Mud shaped into bricks and dried under the sun, or fired for greater strength when the structure demands it. This gives the city a particular rhythm of life. Brickmaking is not a background detail. It is one of the deep technologies of Mesopotamian power. Workers mix clay with straw, press it into moulds, dry it, carry it, stack it, and use bitumen as mortar or waterproofing where needed. Royal inscriptions stamped into bricks turn construction into propaganda, so that even the building material can repeat the king's name. A wall is not only a wall, it is a statement multiplied thousands upon thousands of times. There is a lesser-known intimacy in this kind of architecture. A city of brick needs constant care. Rain, flood, heat, neglect, and war all leave marks. Buildings slump, surfaces crack, walls must be repaired, platforms raised, temples restored. This means that Babylon is never simply built once. It is always being remade. Later kings can dig into older foundations, restore ancient temples, claim continuity with revered rulers, and make renovation appear as piety. To rebuild is to say that one has not broken with the past but rescued it. The evidence remains incomplete for many early phases of the city, because later construction often covers, cuts, or transforms what came before, yet that very layering tells its own story. Babylon becomes powerful not by escaping mud, but by mastering the art of turning mud into memory. The economy that supports such a city is equally layered. Fields outside the walls produce barley, dates, sesame, vegetables, and fodder. Herds and flocks move through managed landscapes. Fishermen, boatmen, brewers, bakers, potters, weavers, metalworkers, merchants, labourers, priests, and scribes all belong to the living machinery of the place. Grain is not merely food, it is wages, tax, offering, ration, and political instrument. A jar of oil, a measure of barley, a length of wool, a day of labour recorded on a tablet. These small units make empire possible before empire has fully arrived. The spectacular city that later astonishes outsiders rests on millions of ordinary transactions, many of them scratched into clay by scribes who are not trying to impress the distant future. They are trying to keep accounts straight. Writing gives Babylon another form of power. Clay tablets preserve debts, contracts, omens, hymns, letters, mathematical exercises, and administrative orders. They are durable almost by accident. A palace can burn and destroy its wooden beams, but the heat may bake tablets harder, allowing them to survive when softer records elsewhere vanish. This is one reason Mesopotamia can feel unusually close to us. Its voices survive not only in royal boasts, but in lists, receipts, school texts, complaints, lawsuits, and temple accounts. Still, survival is uneven. What archaeologists recover depends on where people dug, what later builders disturbed, what fires hardened, what water ruined, and what modern excavations happen to find. Scholars still debate many details of Babylon's early development because the archive is rich in some periods, and frustratingly thin in others. The human city is also a sacred city from early on. In Mesopotamian thought, humans do not live in a universe where religion occupies only a separate corner of life. The gods are woven into weather, fertility, kingship, illness, dreams, war, and the fragile order of society. A temple is not only a place for prayer, it is the house of a god, a landowner, an employer, a storage centre, a ritual stage, and a symbol that the city has a relationship with powers beyond human sight. The god must be served with food, garments, music, offerings, purity, and correct ceremony. If the god is pleased, the city may prosper. If the god is angered or absent, danger spreads through the imagination of the people like sickness through a crowded street. This religious vision does not make Babylon unique, but Babylon will eventually magnify it. The city's later claim to supremacy grows from the older Mesopotamian habit of linking local identity to divine patronage. Each major city has its sacred personality. Nippur has immense religious prestige connected with Enlil. Ur carries the moon god's splendour. Eridu has ancient associations with deep wisdom and the god Enki or Ea. Babylon must find its place among these older sacred landscapes. It cannot simply declare itself central and expect everyone to believe. It needs political success, theological creativity, scribal support, military fortune, and time. Above all, it needs a god whose rise can mirror the city's rise. But before Marduk stands above the divine assembly, before Babylonian priests and scholars reshape cosmic hierarchy, the city must first become necessary. Its position helps. Sitting near important routes and waterways, Babylon is well placed to connect northern and southern Mesopotamia. Control over the region means access to movement grain moving by boat, goods moving by caravan, armies moving along river corridors, messages moving through scribal networks. Geography does not guarantee greatness, but it offers opportunity to those able to organise it. Babylon's location allows it to become a hinge, and in a land of rival cities, a hinge can become a throne. The rise is gradual, and no single explanation fully accounts for it. Political weakness elsewhere, shifting alliances, military leadership, economic networks, and religious adaptation all play their parts. What survives in the record suggests that Babylon's early strength comes not from sudden miracle, but from an ability to gather older Mesopotamian tools into a sharper form. It uses canals and fields, scribes and laws, temples and gods, walls and armies, memory and myth. It is not the first city to do this, it is not even the most ancient, but it becomes one of the most successful at making these forces speak together. So the city made from mud begins to become something harder to erase. Brick by brick, tablet by tablet, canal by canal, Babylon gathers itself from the plain. Its foundations are practical, but its ambitions are already leaning toward the sacred. The river feeds it, the fields sustain it, the scribes remember it, the temples sanctify it, and somewhere within this growing city, Marduk waits to become more than a local god. Because Babylon's true ascent will require heaven itself to be reorganized around its name. As Babylon grows from a practical river city into a place of political weight, its destiny becomes tied to a divine figure who at first does not possess the oldest or most unquestioned authority in Mesopotamia. Marduk is not born into the record as the eternal master of all gods. He rises with his city, and that rise is one of the most revealing transformations in ancient religion. It shows how theology can follow power, and how power can then turn theology back upon the world as proof that its own success was always meant to happen. Babylon needs Marduk, but Marduk also needs Babylon. Together, they become a single argument. If this god is supreme, then his city must be central. If the city is central, then its god must have been chosen to rule. In older Mesopotamian religious geography, other divine names carry deeper prestige. Enlil of Nippur is associated with command and kingship on a cosmic scale. Anu belongs to the high heavens. Ea, or Enki, is connected with wisdom, fresh waters, magic, and hidden knowledge. Shamash brings justice with the sun's searching light. Ishtar can be terrifying in love and war. Sin, the moon god, watches over the rhythm of nights and months. Marduk enters this crowded divine world as Babylon's patron, and at first his importance is local. But local gods can rise when local cities rise. In Mesopotamia, the political map and the divine map are never entirely separate. When one city defeats another, grows wealthy, or becomes the seat of kings, its god may also gain honorary titles and mythic rank. This does not mean that religion is merely propaganda. That would be too simple and too modern a way to flatten a world where divine presence is deeply real to those who serve it. Priests, scribes, kings, farmers, soldiers, and merchants do not necessarily experience these gods as convenient symbols. They experience them as powers woven into the structure of life. But ancient belief also lives inside institutions, and institutions can change. A god's temple can receive new offerings. A myth can be copied with new emphasis. A festival can grow more elaborate. A title once belonging to another deity can be attached to a rising god. The shift may happen gradually enough that it feels less like invention than revelation. What survives in the record suggests that Marduk's ascent is not a single moment, but a long act of religious and political rebalancing. The great myth that later expresses this rebalancing most famously is the Babylonian creation epic, often known by its opening words, Enuma Elish. It tells, in powerful mythic language, how divine conflict leads to cosmic order and how Marduk becomes champion of the gods. He defeats the chaos figure Tiamat, arranges the world from her divided body, establishes stations for the gods, and receives kingship among them. The poem is not simply a creation story in the modern sense. It is a charter of supremacy. It explains why Marduk deserves command. It makes Babylon's divine hierarchy appear written into the structure of creation itself. Scholars still debate the exact date, development, and ritual use of the composition, but its ideological force is clear. It gives cosmic depth to Babylon's political rise. There is something striking in the way Marduk's power is described. He is not only strong, he is authorized. Before he fights chaos, the gods grant him kingship and test his command. In one famous motif, his word has the power to make a garment vanish and reappear. The detail can seem almost small beside the slaying of a primordial monster, but it reveals a key idea. True sovereignty is the power of effective speech. A command is not merely noise. A divine word changes reality. For a Babylonian king listening beneath the shadow of Marduk's temple, this is more than myth. It is a model of rule. The universe itself becomes orderly when the rightful authority speaks and others obey. That idea lies close to Babylon's dark center. Marduk's supremacy turns hierarchy into sacred pattern. The gods have ranks. The cosmos has an arrangement. Cities have patrons. Kings have mandates. Humans have duties. Nothing is supposed to float freely. Disorder is not merely inconvenience. It is a threat with mythic roots. In a land where flood, drought, invasion, disease, and rebellion can overturn life quickly, the promise of order is deeply attractive. Babylon offers not only walls and grain, but a story in which the world makes sense, because a supreme divine authority has conquered chaos and assigned every being its place. The Temple of Marduk, Esagila, becomes the heart of this claim. Its name is often interpreted as something like house whose top is high, and it stands within the sacred complex of Babylon as more than an impressive sanctuary. It is the earthly residence of the god who legitimizes kings. The city may have many shrines, many gods, many neighborhoods, and many daily concerns, but Esagila is the ritual center around which Babylon's highest identity gathers. To approach it is not merely to visit a building, it is to enter a zone where political authority and divine presence meet. The god is fed there, honored there, celebrated there, and asked to sustain the order that the city claims to embody. The king's relationship with Marduk is especially delicate. Mesopotamian kings are powerful, but they are not gods in the same full sense as some Egyptian pharaohs might be presented. They rule under divine authority as chosen servants, shepherds, builders, warriors, restorers, and caretakers. A Babylonian king must show that he respects Marduk, maintains the temples, protects the city, and upholds justice. His success is evidence of favour. But failure can be read as evidence that favour has been withdrawn. This makes kingship both magnificent and vulnerable. The divine source that strengthens a ruler can also judge him. The New Year festival, or Akitu, dramatises this vulnerability with unusual intensity. Though details vary across time and remain debated, the festival includes rituals that renew kingship and cosmic order. One of the most memorable elements preserved in later descriptions involves the king being humbled before Marduk, stripped of royal insignia, and forced to affirm that he has not sinned against the god or neglected Babylon. The priest may strike him. And tears from the king are taken as a favourable sign. The scene is astonishing because it shows royal power being ritually broken in order to be restored. The king stands at the summit of society, yet before Marduk he must appear dependent. His authority is not self-existing, but it must be given back. This ritual humiliation is easy to misunderstand. It does not make the king powerless. In fact, by submitting to Marduk, he receives a stronger claim to rule. But it reveals the logic of Babylonian kingship with unusual clarity. Power must pass through the god. The city's political life is staged as obedience to heaven. The king does not simply command the people, he is seen to be commanded by a higher order. That makes his commands harder to challenge when the ritual system holds. To oppose him may look like opposing the god who has renewed him. Yet the same ritual also contains a hidden danger. If the people can imagine Marduk granting power, they can also imagine Marduk refusing it. Marduk's rise changes Babylon's relationship with other sacred traditions. Older gods are not erased. Mesopotamian religion is not a clean replacement system in which one deity simply drives out all others. Instead, divine genealogies, titles, functions, and relationships are rearranged. Marduk can absorb attributes, receive exalted names, and stand at the head of a divine assembly while other gods remain honoured. This is one reason Babylonian theology is so effective. It does not always need to destroy older belief. It can gather older belief into a new hierarchy. The city becomes powerful partly because it knows how to include the past while placing itself above it. But inclusion is not innocence. When Babylon claims Marduk as king of the gods, it also claims that the universe has a capital. The sacred map bends toward one city. Festivals, myths, statues, and inscriptions all help turn political dominance into cosmic common sense. No single explanation fully accounts for why this vision proved so durable, but its emotional force is not hard to feel. In a dangerous world, people long for order. Babylon says order has a name, a temple, a ritual calendar, and a throne. By the time Marduk stands behind Babylon's kings, the city is no longer only a settlement of canals and brick. It is becoming an idea with divine architecture. Its walls defend bodies, but its theology defends authority. Its god does not merely protect the city, he explains why the city should matter more than others. And once Babylon learns to make that claim, its rulers will carry the logic further, into law, conquest, and the dangerous belief that a king's command can be made to sound like the will of heaven. By the time Hammurabi comes to the throne, Babylon is ready to become more than an ambitious city among rivals, but it is not yet guaranteed anything. Mesopotamia remains a world of competing powers, shifting alliances, old sacred centres, military threats, and delicate balances of water and grain. Kings rise, make treaties, betray them, inherit enemies, and try to turn temporary victories into something that will survive their own deaths. Babylon's advantage is real, but fragile. Its location gives it access to roots and fields. Its god gives it a growing sacred identity. Its scribes give it memory. Yet none of these alone can make an empire. For that, Babylon needs a ruler able to speak the language of conquest and justice at the same time. Hammurabi becomes that ruler, though not at once in the grand, simplified way later memory sometimes imagines him. He does not step into history already ruling a vast empire. He begins as king of a relatively modest Babylonian kingdom in a crowded political landscape. Around him stand older and stronger powers, including Larsa in the south, Eshnunna to the east, Mari on the Euphrates, and Assyria farther north. The world he inhabits is not a blank map waiting for Babylonian order. It is already organised by rival courts, messengers, dynastic marriages, armies, merchants, and long-standing local traditions. Hammurabi's achievement is that he survives this world long enough to master it. His early reign appears cautious. He builds, negotiates, watches, and waits. This patience is important because it reveals that Babylonian power is not only a matter of dramatic battles, it is administrative endurance, political timing, and the ability to make others believe cooperation is safer than resistance until the moment when resistance is no longer possible. Hammurabi strengthens walls, restores temples, manages canals, and presents himself as a proper king in the familiar Mesopotamian style chosen by the gods, protector of the weak, provider of justice, builder of sacred places, and shepherd of the people. These claims are conventional, but convention matters. A king who cannot perform the expected image of kingship risks looking illegitimate before he even draws the sword. Then the balance shifts. Through campaigns and alliances, Hammurabi expands Babylon's reach until many of the old rivals fall under his authority. The details are complex, and the evidence remains incomplete in places. But the broad pattern is clear. Babylon becomes the center of a new political order in the 18th century BCE. Cities that once stood as competitors now answer, directly or indirectly, to Babylonian power. The king who began in a dangerous neighborhood now rules much of Mesopotamia. Yet conquest creates a problem as serious as the one it solves. Armies can win cities, but they cannot by themselves hold together the memories, customs, gods, canals, taxes, and grievances of a wide land. Empire requires a story that makes domination appear as order. This is where Hammurabi's sacred authority becomes so powerful. He presents himself not merely as a successful conqueror, but as the agent of divine justice. The famous law stalely associated with him, later found far from Babylon at Susa after being carried away as plunder, gives this image its most enduring form. At the top, the king stands before Shamash, the sun god of justice, receiving symbols of authority. Beneath this scene are hundreds of legal provisions written in formal language. The monument does not contain every law used in daily life, and scholars still debate exactly how such law collections functioned in practice. It may have been less like a modern legal code applied mechanically in every court, and more like a royal monument of justice, an idealized display of order, precedent, and kingly wisdom. But its message is unmistakable. Hammurabi wants the world to see that his rule is not random force. It is justice under divine light. The content of the laws reveals a society deeply structured by status, property, family, labour, debt, injury, and responsibility. Penalties differ according to social rank. Builders can be punished if houses collapse. Farmers are accountable for neglected canals. Merchants, tavern keepers, physicians, boatmen, wives, husbands, children, slaves, and creditors all appear in the legal imagination of the kingdom. Some laws are harsh, especially by modern standards, but they also show an intense concern with accountability in a world where survival depends on trust, obligation, and the management of risk. A failed canal can ruin fields, a false accusation can destroy a household, a debt can swallow a family, a bad builder can kill sleeping people beneath a roof. Hammurabi's monument turns these dangers into royal responsibility. One of the surprising details is how much the image of justice depends on the vulnerability of the weak. The prologue and epilogue of the stele present Hammurabi as a ruler, appointed to prevent the strong from oppressing the weak, to protect widows and orphans, and to establish righteousness in the land. This does not mean his society is equal. It is not. The laws themselves preserve hierarchy at every turn, yet the royal claim matters because it reveals what kingship is expected to promise. A ruler must not only defeat enemies, he must make internal order believable. If the poor, the indebted, the displaced, and the ordinary cultivator see only predation, the king's sacred image begins to rot from within. Babylon under Hammurabi therefore becomes a place where law, religion, and empire reinforce one another. The king conquers, then explains conquest as the expansion of order. He builds temples, then presents temple care as proof of piety. He issues judgments, then frames judgment as obedience to gods who love justice. He strengthens Babylon, then allows Babylon's god and Babylon's institutions to stand closer to the center of Mesopotamian life. This fusion does not make the empire immortal. In fact, Hammurabi's empire weakens after his death, as many ancient empires do when the exceptional energy of one ruler cannot be easily inherited. But the pattern he helps establish endures far beyond the immediate political structure. The fragility after Hammurabi is crucial. It reminds us that sacred authority can magnify power, but not remove the old pressures of geography, economy, rebellion, succession, and war. A king may claim divine favour, but canals still silt up. Local elites still calculate their advantage. Armies still require supplies. Conquered cities still remember independence. The divine image of order does not cancel human instability. It only gives rulers a language for managing it. No single explanation fully accounts for the later weakening of old Babylonian power, but the broader truth is clear enough: empire is easier to proclaim than to maintain. Even so, Hammurabi changes Babylon's future. He gives the city a memory of rule that later kings can look back upon. He demonstrates that Babylon can dominate more than its immediate surroundings. He shows how a king may stand between gods and people, not as a god himself, but as the chosen instrument through which justice, punishment, building, and conquest become part of one sacred duty. This model will echo through later Babylonian history, even when the city falls under foreign dynasties. Suffers humiliation or waits for revival. The darker implication is already visible. If law comes from divine authority through the king, then obedience can be sanctified. If conquest is described as justice, then violence can wear the face of order. If the ruler is protector of the weak, Then those crushed by the system may find their suffering hidden beneath the language of righteousness. Hammurabi's achievement is real, and his monument remains one of the great witnesses to ancient political thought. But it also reveals how easily the dream of justice can become part of the machinery of power. Babylon has now learned something it will never quite forget. Mud brick can build a city, Marduk can give it sacred ambition. But law gives empire a voice that sounds calm, necessary, and eternal. Under Hammurabi, Babylon does not yet rule the gods. It is still learning how to rule men by claiming that heaven has already approved the order written on earth. In Babylon's world, defeat does not always end when the walls fall. A city can be conquered, its king killed or carried away, its granaries emptied, its people taxed, scattered, or humbled, and still the deepest wound may come from something stranger, the loss of its god. To modern eyes, an army stealing a statue may look like the removal of a sacred artwork or political trophy. In Mesopotamia, it can mean something far more intimate and terrifying. The statue is not merely an image that reminds worshippers of the deity. Once properly created, purified, and enlivened through ritual, it can be treated as the deity's presence on earth. It is fed, washed, clothed, honoured, and housed. It receives music, incense, offerings, and fear. When it is taken, the city does not lose a symbol. It may feel as though heaven itself has turned its face away. This belief reaches deep into the emotional structure of Mesopotamian religion. The gods are not invisible ideas floating above daily life. They have temples as houses, treasuries as possessions, servants as attendants, fields as sources of food, and statues as earthly bodies. Their presence must be maintained with exact care. A ritual error is not just an awkward mistake. Neglecting the god can threaten the balance between human and divine worlds. The temple staff must wake the deity. Present meals, change garments, perform purifications, carry out festivals, and preserve the dignity of the sacred household. A god statue can travel in procession, visit another deity, appear before the people, or withdraw into hidden rooms. The boundary between theology and administration is thin, because serving a god also means managing food, labour, land, textiles, animals, precious materials, and skilled craft. The making of such a statue is itself surrounded by mystery. The physical object may be carved from wood, covered with gold, adorned with stones, and shaped by artisans. But after its ritual transformation, its human manufacture is deliberately obscured. Ceremonies sometimes described by scholars as mouth-opening or mouth-washing rituals help separate the statue from ordinary craft and prepare it to become a living divine presence. The artisans may symbolically deny their own role. As if human hands cannot be credited with making a god. This is a lesser-known detail, and it matters. It shows that ancient Mesopotamians recognized attention at the heart of sacred images. Everyone knows craftsmen work on the statue, yet ritual insists that the result belongs to a realm beyond human making. The object is made, and then it is made more than an object. Because of this, the capture of divine statues becomes one of the most powerful acts of ancient warfare. It is military, religious, psychological, and diplomatic all at once. When a conquering king seizes a god, he does not simply loot a temple. He claims that the defeated city's divine protector has either abandoned the people or been overpowered by the gods of the victor. The captive statue can be carried to a foreign land, placed in another temple, and kept as a hostage of cosmic politics. The defeated population must live with the possibility that its god is absent because of their sins, their king's failure, or the irresistible decision of heaven. The evidence remains incomplete for how ordinary people experienced every such event, but the written record makes clear that the return of a statue could be celebrated as a restoration of life itself. Babylon knows this trauma well. Across its long history, Marduk's statue is taken more than once or kept away under conditions that become politically explosive. The god's absence is never a minor inconvenience. It disrupts ritual life and damages kingship. If the king cannot take the hand of Marduk during the New Year festival, his legitimacy may be shadowed. If Marduk is not properly present in Esagila, Babylon cannot fully perform the sacred drama that renews the bond between city, king, and cosmos. The city's claim to be the centre of divine order depends on the god being there. Remove the statue, and the whole magnificent structure trembles. One striking example comes from the long conflict between Babylonia and its powerful neighbours. The Hittites, Kassites, Assyrians, Elamites, and others all shape Babylon's fate at different times, and the movement of divine images becomes part of that wider political world. When statues are carried away, later rulers may gain immense prestige by bringing them back. Restoration becomes a royal virtue. A king can present himself as the one who heals the broken relationship between god and city. He does not merely recover property, he reverses abandonment. He persuades the people that divine favour has returned through his hands. This creates an extraordinary paradox. The gods are supreme, yet their earthly bodies can be captured. They are powerful, yet they depend on human armies, priests, and kings to move, protect, restore, and honour their statues. Mesopotamian thinkers are not blind to the problem. They can explain disaster by saying the god chose to leave in anger, or permitted capture as punishment, or later returned when order was restored. Such explanations preserve divine power. But they also reveal how deeply politics enters religious interpretation. Victory and defeat must be made meaningful. A city cannot simply say its god was weaker. It must say the god had reasons. Babylon's rulers learned to use this language with great skill. When they prosper, Marduk has favoured them. When enemies fall, Marduk has judged them. When a statue returns, Marduk has accepted restoration. When a rival king fails, perhaps the gods have rejected him. These claims are not only cynical inventions, though they can certainly serve political ends. They are part of a shared mental world in which divine intention must be read through events. But that shared world gives enormous power to those who control ritual speech, temple records, royal inscriptions, and public ceremonies. The priest, the scribe, and the king become interpreters of catastrophe. Here the city's darker logic sharpens. If a god's presence can be housed, processed, displayed, hidden, removed, and restored, then control over the god's earthly life becomes control over public meaning. Whoever guards the statue guards legitimacy. Whoever restores the statue can claim divine friendship. Whoever explains the statue's absence can shape the memory of defeat. The sacred image is both more than an object and dangerously vulnerable to being used as one. No single explanation fully accounts for the emotional force of these practices, but they show that Babylonian religion is not a mist of vague belief. It is embodied, organised, and politically charged. The capture of gods also teaches Babylon a lesson about fear. A wall can be rebuilt after an invasion, a burned gate can be repaired, grain can be replanted if enough people survive. But the loss of a god strikes at the story that makes suffering bearable. It suggests that the invisible order has broken. For a city like Babylon, whose whole identity increasingly rests on the supremacy of Marduk, this is almost unbearable. The god must be present. The rituals must continue. The king must receive authority from the divine hand. Without that, Babylon is only brick, water, and crowds beneath the sun. And so the city becomes obsessed with restoration, presence, and sacred continuity. Its kings build temples not only because temples are beautiful, but because temples hold the divine body of political order. Its enemies understand that to wound Babylon, one may strike not only its soldiers but its gods. Its priests understand that the proper service of a statue can sustain the illusion that heaven still dwells safely inside the city. What began as devotion becomes a system of immense consequence. In Babylon, the gods can be captured, and because they can be captured, they can also be used to capture the minds of men. Above the low plain of Babylon, where most buildings are made from earth and most horizons lie open beneath the heat, the ziggurat rises as an argument against flatness. It is not a mountain, but it behaves like one in a land that has none. Its stepped mass lifts sacred space upward, layer by layer, turning brick into height, labour into theology, and urban ambition into a vertical line between the human city and the sky. Later imagination will remember Babylon through the image of a tower reaching toward heaven, a structure so proud that it becomes a warning. The historical ziggurat is more complex than that memory, but the memory is not random. Babylon really does build upward, and in doing so it gives architecture the shape of desire. The great ziggurat of Babylon is known from ancient texts as Itamenanki, often interpreted as the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. Even the name carries the whole dream. It suggests not merely a tall building, but a cosmic joint, a place where the deepest foundation below and the divine heights above are somehow joined in one sacred structure. At its base lies the city, full of markets, canals, courtyards, animals, workers, priests, officials, and dust. Above it rises a constructed sacred mountain, probably crowned with a temple or shrine. The exact appearance of the ziggurat at different stages remains debated, because what survives physically is damaged, and because later descriptions are shaped by distance, admiration, and sometimes misunderstanding. Yet enough evidence exists to show that this was one of Babylon's defining monuments. A ziggurat is not a pyramid in the Egyptian sense. It is not primarily a tomb, and it is not built to hide a royal body inside a sealed eternity. It is closer to a raised platform for divine presence, a staged descent, a way of lifting the god's house above ordinary ground. Its steps and terraces create a sacred hierarchy in brick. The gods are not imagined as living casually at street level among shopkeepers and donkeys. The houses can stand apart, elevated, purified, surrounded by restricted access and ritual meaning. To climb is not merely to move upward. It is to pass through degrees of separation between the common and the holy. Yet this sacred mountain is artificial. That is part of its fascination. Babylon does not possess a natural peak where heaven seems close. It manufactures one. Thousands of workers must shape bricks, haul materials, prepare bitumen, raise platforms, repair surfaces, and support the enormous physical burden of the structure. Royal inscriptions connected with Babylonian building projects often emphasize restoration rather than invention, because restoring an ancient sacred structure allows a king to present himself as faithful to divine tradition. A ruler can say that he has raised the summit, strengthened the foundations, covered the building with splendour, or made it shine for the god. Behind such claims lie logistics rations, labour gangs, craftsmen, administrators, and an economy strong enough to turn food into height. There is a lesser-known practical side to this monumentality. In a mud-brick world, height is difficult to preserve. The ziggurat's scale must have required repeated maintenance, and parts of its history likely involve cycles of decay, rebuilding, damage, and restoration. When ancient kings boast of making sacred buildings as bright as the sun, they are speaking not only from vanity but from the reality that buildings weather, crack, and slump. The divine mountain must be renewed because the earth keeps pulling it down. That tension gives Babylon's sacred architecture a strange poignancy. the city builds toward heaven using the most earthly material imaginable. The Tower of Babel tradition, known from the biblical book of Genesis, later transforms Babylon's tower into a story about human pride, divine response, and the confusion of languages. It is not a straightforward historical description of Itamananki, and it should not be treated as an eyewitness account of Babylonian construction. Still, the association is understandable, a massive tower in Babylon, a name linked by later Hebrew wordplay with confusion. And a city known for imperial ambition all fuse into a powerful moral image. In the biblical memory, the people build upward to make a name for themselves, and heaven interrupts them. In Babylonian royal ideology, by contrast, building upward can be an act of piety, a way to honour the god and stabilise the world. The same structure can therefore be read in opposite ways as sacred service from within Babylon, and as dangerous arrogance from outside it. That contrast is one of the great clues to Babylon's afterlife. Empires often describe their own monuments as order, while those who suffer under them may see the same monuments as domination. The ziggurat may be a temple platform, a cosmic symbol, a miracle of organisation, and a sign of devotion. It may also appear as a brick mountain built by human labour to proclaim that one city has a privileged road to heaven. Both perceptions can exist because monuments are never innocent. They organise space, memory, and emotion. They tell people where to look, where to gather, where to bow, and where not to enter. The ziggurat also changes the skyline of thought. In a flat land, anything high becomes visible from far away. Travellers approaching Babylon may have seen sacred height before they understood the streets. The tower announces that the city is not only defended by walls, but crowned by divine architecture. It becomes a landmark of authority, a reminder that Babylon's power is not meant to spread only horizontally across fields and provinces, but vertically into the realm of the gods. The city's ambition is not satisfied with controlling canals, armies, and tribute. It wants its centre to be recognised as a cosmic centre. Scholars still debate details of the tower's dimensions, stages, and appearance. Ancient sources give numbers that may be symbolic, idealised, or difficult to reconcile with archaeology. Later Greek writers describe Babylon with fascination, but their accounts must be read carefully because they sometimes mix observation, report, exaggeration, and inherited wonder. Archaeological remains offer firmer ground, yet they cannot restore the full sensory experience the colour of sun on brick. The smell of bitumen, the echo of ritual movement, the distance from which the tower first appeared to a farmer, merchant, or captive brought toward the city. The evidence remains incomplete, and that incompleteness has allowed the tower to grow in imagination long after its physical form collapsed. Still, the deeper meaning is clear enough. Etamananki embodies Babylon's central claim that earth and heaven can meet through the city's sacred order. It is not simply tall. It is placed within a system Esagala, Marduk, the king, the festivals, the tablets, the processional ways, the cosmic myths. Tower makes sense because the whole city is learning to present itself as the architecture of divine kingship. To rebuild the tower is to repair the link between worlds. To neglect it is to risk the appearance of disorder. To stand beneath it is to feel, perhaps, that human life has been arranged under a power too old and too high to challenge. Yet the tower also exposes the danger in Babylon's dream. The higher the city builds, the more visible its ambition becomes. The more it claims to connect heaven and earth, the more devastating it will be when the connection fails. A modest shrine can fall and be mourned locally. A cosmic tower that claims to join the foundation of heaven and earth becomes a symbol large enough for enemies, exiles, and later generations to turn into judgment. Babylon builds upward to honour the gods. But the very act teaches the world to imagine Babylon as the city that tried to climb beyond its human limits. And so the tower stands in the story as both sacred mountain and warning. It is a place of ritual, labour, beauty, and power. It is also a monument to the ancient temptation to make heaven administratively reachable, architecturally visible, and politically useful. Its bricks rise from the same mud that feeds the fields, but they are arranged to suggest eternity. That is the genius and the unease of Babylon. It knows that humans are made of dust. Yet it keeps building as though dust can be stacked high enough to touch the gods. By the time Nebuchadnezzar II takes Babylon into its most dazzling age, the city has already lived many lives. It has risen, fallen, submitted, rebelled, been honoured, been punished, and been rebuilt by hands that knew they were working inside a sacred inheritance. But under Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon becomes something almost theatrical in scale. It is no longer enough for the city to be ancient, holy, and strategically placed. It must be seen as overwhelming. It must turn every visited subject, captive, envoy, and rival into a witness. The king does not simply rule from Babylon. He makes Babylon into the visible proof that his rule belongs to the order of the universe. Nebuchadnezzar inherits a moment of extraordinary opportunity. The Assyrian Empire, which had dominated much of the Near East with terrifying efficiency, has collapsed after years of war and internal strain. Babylon, once humiliated by Assyrian violence, now stands at the head of a new empire. The reversal is dramatic. The city that had known the trauma of subordination becomes the city from which armies move westward. Tribute flows inward, and royal ambition spreads across old Assyrian roads. Nebuchadnezzar's father, Nabopolassar, has already helped create this new political world, but Nebuchadnezzar gives it its most enduring image. He becomes the builder king, the restorer, the conqueror whose name is stamped not only into memory but into brick. His Babylon is not built from fantasy, it is built from labour. Men cut clay, press moulds, bake bricks, haul loads, raise walls, plaster surfaces, lay pavements, shape canals, and decorate gates. Administrators count supplies, scribes record deliveries, skilled craftsmen work with glazed brick, metal, wood, and stone imported from lands far beyond the plain. The king's inscriptions present these works as acts of devotion to Marduk and the gods, and they are meant to sound pious. Yet piety and power walk together. To rebuild a temple is to honour heaven, but also to declare that the king alone has the wealth, organisation, and divine favour required to restore the world properly. Every sacred project strengthens the political body of the empire. The most famous entrance into this world is the Ishtar Gate, with its glazed blue bricks and rows of dragons and bulls. In its restored and reconstructed form, it has become one of the defining images of Babylon. But even in antiquity it must have been astonishing. Colour itself matters. In a landscape of dust, sun, and brown brick, the deep glazed surfaces would have seemed almost supernatural, a manufactured sky set into the wall. The creatures on the gate are not random decoration. Bulls are associated with Adad, the storm god. The dragon-like Mushushu is linked with Marduk and other deities. The gate turns divine symbolism into public architecture. To pass through it is to enter a city watched by sacred beasts. From there, the processional way guides movement through royal and religious space. Lions, associated with Ishtar, stride along the walls in repeated power, each one frozen in a controlled march. The repetition is important. One lion is an image. Many lions become rhythm, intimidation, ceremony. During festivals, divine statues, priests, musicians, officials, and perhaps the king himself move through these spaces, turning the city into a ritual path. Architecture controls the body. It directs the eyes, slows the feet, and makes power feel inevitable. Babylon's streets are not merely streets. At their most sacred moments, they become corridors through which heaven appears to move. There is a surprising tenderness hidden inside Nebuchadnezzar's building program, though it is easy to miss beneath the grandeur. His inscriptions often speak of care, restoration, and reverence for ancient foundations. He presents himself not as an innovator tearing up the past, but as the king who listens to old sacred requirements and returns buildings to their proper splendour. In one sense, this is political language. In another, it reflects a real Mesopotamian reverence for antiquity. Ancient foundations are powerful because they connect the present to the first ordering of the world. A king who finds, respects, and rebuilds them is not simply improving a city. He is placing himself in a chain of legitimate memory. Yet the beauty of Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon has a darker underside. Monumental building is never weightless. It requires extraction from fields, provinces, temples, conquered territories, and human bodies. The empire's wealth flows toward the capital, and the capital turns that wealth into walls, gates, palaces, temples, and spectacle. What appears to one viewer as divine order may appear to another as the polished face of forced labour and imperial demand. The evidence remains incomplete on the exact experience of every worker and captive involved in Babylon's projects, but the broader system is clear. Great cities do not shine without drawing resources from somewhere else. Nebuchadnezzar is also remembered through conquest. His campaigns in the west bring Babylonian power into the lands of Syria, Phoenicia, and Judah. The destruction of Jerusalem and the deportation of elites to Babylonia will become one of the most consequential events in religious history. But even before that trauma is considered fully, it reveals the nature of Neo-Babylonian rule. Like other ancient empires, Babylon uses deportation, tribute, siege warfare, and political replacement to secure control. It is not unusually gentle because it is beautiful. Its splendour and its brutality belong to the same imperial system. This is the golden illusion at the heart of Nebuchadnezzar's city. Babylon is made to look like the natural centre of the world, as though all roads, gods, goods, and kingship flow toward it because the cosmos itself has arranged things that way. But the illusion must be built, guarded, repeated, and financed. It depends on armies in distant lands, scribes in storehouses, workers in heat, priests in temples, and captives who may look at the city's wonders with grief rather than admiration. A lion in glazed brick may symbolize divine strength, but the person forced from a ruined homeland may see only the emblem of the empire that has swallowed his life. The Hanging Gardens belong to this atmosphere of wonder and uncertainty. Later Greek and Roman writers describe a marvel of elevated greenery, terraces, irrigation, and royal luxury, often connected with Nebuchadnezzar and sometimes imagined as a gift for a homesick queen. Yet no Babylonian text securely describes the gardens in the famous form later tradition gives them, and scholars still debate whether they existed in Babylon or confused with Assyrian gardens at Nineveh, or were transformed by layers of storytelling. The popular image remains powerful, but the evidence is uncertain. This uncertainty does not weaken Babylon's mystery, it sharpens it. The city became so associated with grandeur that later imagination could attach impossible gardens to it and find the story believable. Nebuchadnezzar's palaces also deepen the impression of controlled magnificence. Royal space in Babylon is not merely domestic, it is administrative, ceremonial, defensive, and symbolic. Courtyards, throne rooms, walls, and decorated surfaces create distance between the king and ordinary life. The ruler becomes a figure approached through layers of architecture, just as the god is approached through layers of ritual. This mirroring is not accidental. The city teaches hierarchy through space. Marduk has his sacred house, the king has his palace. The people move through streets shaped by both. Power becomes a matter of where one may stand, when one may enter, and how far one remains from the centre. Still, Nebuchadnezzar is not only a symbol, he is a historical ruler navigating the pressures of empire. He must hold territories, manage succession, maintain alliances, suppress revolt, and keep the favour of Babylon's priestly institutions. His inscriptions may speak in the polished voice of royal certainty, but no reign is free from anxiety. The larger Babylon becomes, the more it must defend the claim that its greatness is deserved. Every new wall is also a confession that enemies exist. Every ritual renewal hints that order can decay. Every boast of divine favour contains the fear that favour might one day be withdrawn. At its height, Babylon must have seemed almost impossible to imagine in ruins. The gates gleam, the walls stretch, the temples receive offerings. The ziggurat binds heaven and earth in brick. The processions move according to calendar and chant. The king's name is pressed into countless building materials, as though repetition can defeat oblivion. For those inside the imperial dream, Babylon appears not merely successful, but ordained, for those beneath its shadow. It may appear as something colder, a city that has learned to make domination beautiful. And that is why Nebuchadnezzar's golden age feels so unstable beneath its surface. The more perfect Babylon becomes as image, the more fragile it becomes as truth. Its glory depends on constant performance. Its sacred order depends on political success. Its God's favour must be proven again and again through victory, prosperity, and ritual. The city shines because everyone is made to look at it, but no empire can control every eye forever. Somewhere beyond the Blue Gate, beyond the lions, beyond the palace walls and sacred towers, other peoples remember loss, other gods are invoked, other kings wait, and even Babylon, dressed in gold and glazed brick, cannot build a wall high enough to keep the future out. At night, Babylon's power does not vanish with the sun. It changes shape. The heat drains slowly from the brick walls, the canals darken, lamps appear in courtyards and temple rooms, and above the flat plain the sky opens with a clarity that modern cities have almost forgotten. The stars do not look decorative in such a world. They look official. They appear in ordered ranks, crossing the darkness with a regularity that seems older than kings and more patient than stone. For Babylonian scholars, priests and observers, the heavens are not silent emptiness. They are a vast writing surface, and the gods have written there in light. Babylonian astronomy grows from a much older Mesopotamian tradition of watching the sky for meaning. The movements of the moon, planets, stars, eclipses, storms, and unusual celestial events are recorded, compared, interpreted, and preserved. This work is not science in the modern separated sense, but it is also not simple superstition. It is disciplined, cumulative, and often astonishingly careful. Scribes keep records over generations. They note appearances and disappearances, positions and timings, regular cycles and alarming deviations, in temple and scholarly settings. The sky becomes a field of knowledge where observation and omen interpretation remain deeply intertwined. The evidence suggests that Babylonian scholars helped create some of the most sophisticated astronomical traditions of the ancient world, even while their purpose was shaped by religious and political concerns. The logic behind this watching is powerful. If the gods govern the universe, then the universe may reveal divine intention. A lunar eclipse is not merely a shadow crossing the moon, it may be a warning. The appearance of Mars, the behaviour of Venus, the timing of a storm, or the shape of the moon may carry significance for the king, the harvest, the army, or the land. Omen texts gather such interpretations into immense systems. If a certain event occurs in the heavens, then a corresponding event may occur on Earth. The connection is not always simple, and scholars still debate exactly how different kinds of omen knowledge were used in practice. But the underlying assumption is clear: heaven and earth speak to one another. This gives Babylon's learned class an extraordinary role. The king may command armies, but he cannot personally read every sign in the sky. He depends on specialists, men trained in writing, calculation, ritual, and inherited interpretation. These scholars do not simply gaze upward in wonder. They serve power by translating uncertainty into warning. Their reports can advise ritual action, political caution, military timing, or protective ceremonies. In a world where kingship depends on divine favour, the ability to detect divine displeasure before disaster strikes becomes a form of political importance. The astrologer priest is not a marginal dreamer. He can be part of the nervous system of the state. One lesser known and striking practice shows how seriously celestial danger could be taken. In some Mesopotamian traditions, when ominous signs threaten the king, a substitute king ritual might be performed. A temporary figure could be placed on the throne in a controlled ritual role, absorbing the predicted evil while the real king withdrew from danger. After the ominous period passed, the substitute could be removed, sometimes killed, and the legitimate king restored. The details varied and are best documented in Assyrian context, but the idea reveals the frightening intimacy between omen, kingship, and ritual management. If the heavens announce danger to the king, humans may try to redirect the blow. They do not merely accept fate, they negotiate with it through ceremony. Babylonian sky knowledge also becomes increasingly mathematical. Over time, scholars develop methods for predicting lunar and planetary phenomena with impressive precision. They identify cycles, construct schemes, and produce tables that allow future events to be anticipated. This does not erase the religious meaning of the heavens. Instead, prediction can intensify authority. If the future movements of the sky can be calculated, then the divine order appears even more structured. The universe is not random, it is patterned. Those who know the pattern stand closer to the hidden machinery of the gods. Calendars are part of this same order. Months begin with the moon, festivals depend on correct timing, agricultural, ritual, administrative, and royal life all need coordination. To control the calendar is to control the rhythm by which a society meets its gods. Intercalary months may be inserted to keep lunar months aligned with the seasons, and such decisions carry practical and sacred weight. A festival held at the wrong time is not just inconvenient, it may be ritually dangerous. Babylon's priests and scholars help regulate sacred time, making the city not only a place where divine order is housed, but a place where divine time is measured. This is one of Babylon's most enduring legacies. Later Greek astronomy is deeply influenced by Mesopotamian observations and methods. The division of the circle into 360 degrees, the use of sexagesimal calculation, and detailed planetary records all belong to a wider inheritance in which Babylon plays a major role. The modern world, almost without noticing, still carries traces of Mesopotamian numerical habits every time it divides an hour into 60 minutes or a minute into 60 seconds. The city that tried to organise heaven left marks on time itself. This does not mean Babylon invented everything later associated with astronomy, but its contribution is profound and well-grounded. Yet the political shadow remains. A predictable heaven can become a governable heaven in the imagination of rulers. If the stars can be read, perhaps danger can be managed. If omens can be interpreted, perhaps divine anger can be delayed, redirected, or softened. If rituals can answer celestial warnings, perhaps kingship can survive threats written above it. Babylon's scholars do not claim that humans command the gods in a simple sense. That would misrepresent their world. But the system does suggest that the signs of the gods can be monitored and answered through expert knowledge. The king does not rule heaven, yet he surrounds himself with those who claim to know how heaven's messages work. There is a quiet unease in this. The more carefully Babylon reads the sky, the more dependent power becomes on interpretation. A strange eclipse can unsettle a court. A planet in an ominous position can produce fear. A failed prediction can damage trust. Competing experts may disagree. The evidence remains incomplete for many specific moments, but the broader pattern shows that knowledge is never neutral in Babylon. It gives comfort and creates anxiety at the same time. To see signs everywhere is to live in a universe rich with meaning, but also crowded with warnings. The heavens also humble Babylon, even as Babylon tries to master them. The city can build walls, temples, gates, and towers. It can redirect rivers and move populations. It can stamp the king's name into brick and make lions march forever along a ceremonial road, but it cannot stop the moon from darkening, Venus from vanishing into the sun's glare, or Saturn from creeping through the night at its own slow pace. The sky offers order, but not obedience. It can be measured, not owned. It can be interpreted, not silenced. Still, in the temple schools and scholarly households of Babylon, generations keep watching. They press signs into clay, they copy old omen series, they refine calculations, they look for repetition in the heavens and consequence on earth. In their work, the city's ambition reaches a new level. Babylon no longer only builds a tower to all the gods, it builds an archive of the sky. It turns the heavens into records, predictions, warnings, and ritual obligations. It seeks not merely to please Marduk in his temple, but to understand the broader divine order in which Marduk's city claims its central place. So Babylon becomes a city that measures darkness. While ordinary people sleep, worry, pray, trade, or whisper in courtyards, trained eyes follow the slow movements above the rooftops. The empire's confidence depends in part on men who can read fear in an eclipse and reassurance in a cycle. The stars glitter beyond reach, yet Babylon pulls them into tablets, calendars, and royal decisions. It cannot rule the heavens, but it can make heaven administratively legible. And in that act, beautiful and unsettling at once, the city's oldest dream becomes sharper to place the universe into an order that human power can consult, interpret, and use. Behind Babylon's public splendor, behind the Blue Gate, the lions, the processional road, the sacred tower, and the royal inscriptions that make kings sound almost weightless, there is another Babylon that moves by ration, account, storage, and routine. It is less visible than the city of festival and empire, but it is no less important. The gods may dwell in houses of ore, but those houses require barley, dates, oil, wool, animals, beer, labourers, singers, guards, cooks, scribes, craftsmen, cleaners, and administrators. Divine presence must be fed by human systems. Sacred order must be scheduled. The mystery inside the temple walls is not that religion hides from daily life. It is that religion sits at the centre of daily life and makes the ordinary machinery of survival appear holy. The temple is often imagined as a quiet place of prayer, but in Babylon is also a great institution, Esagila. The temple of Marduk is the spiritual heart of the city, yet its holiness does not float above economics. It owns or controls resources, it receives offerings, it employs personnel, it stores goods, it supports rituals that require constant material supply. The god's household must function like a vast noble estate, except its master is divine. This is one of the most revealing features of Mesopotamian religion. The gods are served through systems that look, from one angle, deeply practical. Grain arrives, animals are selected, textiles are prepared, incense and aromatics are obtained, musicians and lamentation priests perform, scribes record what enters and leaves, the sacred world has paperwork. This paperwork is one of the reasons Babylon does not vanish entirely into legend. Clay tablets preserve the texture of administration with a stubbornness that royal monuments cannot match. They reveal a world where temple life depends on measured quantities and named people, a delivery of barley, a payment of silver, a list of workers, a transfer of land, a contract involving prebends or temple income. These fragments show the sacred as something managed. A god may be eternal, but his daily meal has to be prepared on time. A festival may renew cosmic order, but someone must supply the animals, clean the spaces, arrange the garments, and account for expenses afterward. The divine household is mysterious in meaning and very concrete in operation. The feeding of the gods is especially striking. In ritual, meals are presented to divine statues as though to living beings of immense rank. The food is not simply thrown away. After presentation, portions may be redistributed among temple personnel or others entitled to receive them. This creates a sacred economy in which offerings move through divine hands, symbolically or ritually, before returning to human society. The system reinforces hierarchy. Those closest to the god's service gain access to prestige, income, and influence. The temple is not only a place where humans give to heaven, it is also a place where goods are transformed by ritual and then flow back through human networks. There is a lesser-known social complexity here. Temple service is divided into roles, offices, and rights that can be inherited, leased, sold, or shared in certain periods and contexts. Some families may hold claims to specific kinds of temple income or duties. Sacred labour is not always performed by anonymous servants moved at will by a priestly machine. It can be embedded in family strategies, contracts, rivalries, and status. The temple is holy. But it is also a place where people negotiate advantage. The evidence varies by time and archive, and scholars still debate the full range of temple organisation across Babylon's long history. But the surviving records show that sacred institutions are deeply entangled with social life. This entanglement gives priests and temple administrators real power. They are not merely ritual specialists murmuring in shadowed rooms. They help guard the continuity of the city's relationship with its gods. They know the correct procedures, the calendars, the purity rules, the hymns, the offerings, the meanings of omens, and the traditions that define legitimacy. Kings need them. A ruler may command armies, but he cannot simply improvise the service of Marduk. If he neglects temples, insults priests, disrupts rituals, or mismanages sacred property, his political image can suffer. Babylon's god may grant kingship, but human institutions speak for the god's requirements. At the same time, temples need kings, royal protection, building projects, endowments, military security, and public honour all strengthen temple life. The relationship is therefore reciprocal and tense. The king supports the god's house to prove piety and legitimacy. The temple sustains the ritual language that makes kingship sacred. Each side benefits from the other, and each side can become dangerous to the other when trust weakens. No single explanation fully accounts for every conflict between palace and temple in Babylonian history, but the pattern is familiar in many ancient states. Sacred institutions can bless power, restrain power, or help turn opinion against power when a ruler appears to have lost divine favour. Inside this world, secrecy does not necessarily mean conspiracy. Much of temple life is restricted because sacred presence itself requires boundaries. Not everyone may enter the most holy spaces. Not everyone may see the god in every condition. Not everyone may handle sacred objects, garments, food, or ritual tools. Hiddenness creates reverence. A god who is always exposed becomes too ordinary. The temple protects mystery by controlling access. This is not deception in the simple sense. It is a religious logic in which holiness increases as one moves inward, away from dust, noise, and common sight. Yet restricted access also gives human gatekeepers enormous interpretive authority. Those who stand nearest the god can tell others what the god requires. The central image remains the divine statue. Marduk's statue in Esagila is the focus of service, awe, and political meaning. It must be cared for according to tradition, and its presence makes Babylon's claims possible. If the statue is absent, damaged, dishonoured, or ritually inaccessible, the city's sacred machinery falters. If the statue is present, properly served, and carried through the city at the right moments, Babylon can perform its identity as the chosen seat of divine kingship. The god's body is therefore both holy and institutional. It gathers devotion, wealth, fear, and legitimacy into one concentrated point. The temple walls enclose another kind of power as well, memory. Scribes preserve rituals, myths, lexical lists, omen collections, mathematical knowledge, astronomical observations, and older traditions that connect Babylon to a deep past. A city may conquer by arms, but it endures through archives. The scholar priest can reach backward into centuries of copied knowledge and forward into predictions, calendars, and interpretations. This gives Babylon a continuity that outlives individual rulers. Kings die and dynasties change, but the temple's learned traditions can claim to remember what proper order looks like. Yet the system is fragile because it depends on belief, performance, and material flow all at once. If fields fail, offerings suffer. If war disrupts supply, rituals strain. If a king quarrels with powerful temple interests, legitimacy trembles. If conquered peoples see the temple only as the sacred face of their oppressor, Babylon's holiness becomes part of imperial resentment. What appears from the centre as divine service can appear from the margins as extraction polished by ritual. The evidence remains incomplete for the feelings of ordinary workers who supplied the system, but the structure itself shows that sacred grandeur is never free. So the secret inside Babylon's temple walls is not a single forbidden rite. It is the discovery that gods, once housed in cities, require institutions, and institutions create power. Marduk is served with reverence, but through that reverence move grain, land, labour, status, and royal legitimacy. The temple makes heaven visible, but it also makes hierarchy durable. It teaches people that the highest order of the universe has a local address, a staff, a calendar, and accounts written on clay. Babylon does not merely worship the gods, it organises the conditions under which the gods appear to rule, and through that organisation, men rule one another with a force far stronger than command alone. The road to Babylon is not always travelled by merchants, priests, envoys, or soldiers moving with purpose and choice. Sometimes it is travelled by people who have lost the right to decide where their lives will unfold. Families walk under guard. Skilled workers, scribes, nobles, craftsmen, soldiers, singers, and children are drawn away from cities that have resisted too long or chosen the wrong side in the politics of empire. Behind them are broken gates, burnt houses, emptied courts, and temples where the old rhythms have been interrupted. Ahead lies Babylon, magnificent and terrifying, a city that can turn defeat into labour, grief into administration, and uprooted people into useful parts of an imperial design. Deportation is not a Babylonian invention. Ancient Near Eastern empires used forced movement as a tool of rule long before and around Babylon's time, especially the Assyrians, who develop it with formidable scale and method. But the Neo-Babylonian Empire inherits and applies the logic in its own way. To move people is to weaken rebellion, remove local elites, punish resistance, supply labour, and redirect talent toward the imperial centre or other strategic regions. It is brutal. But it is not random. That is what makes it so chilling. Deportation is violence made administrative. It takes the chaos of conquest and gives it lists, routes, destinations, and economic purpose. The Babylonian destruction of Jerusalem in the early 6th century BCE becomes the most famous example because its memory is preserved with extraordinary force in biblical and later Jewish tradition. Yet for Babylon, Judah is one piece within a broader imperial landscape. The empire seeks to control the western territories left unstable after Assyria's collapse and contested by Egypt. Small kingdoms sit between greater powers and make desperate calculations. Loyalty shifts. Revolt promises freedom and often brings catastrophe. When Jerusalem resists Babylonian authority, the consequences are devastating. The city is taken, the temple is destroyed, the Davidic monarchy is broken, and groups of Judeans are deported to Babylonia. For the deportees, Babylon is not an abstract symbol, it is a place of shock. They arrive in a land that is ancient, wealthy, irrigated, multilingual, and ritually dense. They see canals, fields, temples, and administrative systems far larger than the kingdom many of them have known. Some are settled in communities where they can preserve aspects of identity, family, and religious memory. Cuneiform records from Babylonia, including documents associated with Judean communities such as those known from the Al-Yahudu tablets, suggest that deported Judeans could participate in economic life, hold obligations, lease land, pay dues, and transmit names across generations. This does not make exile gentle, it makes it more historically complex. Captivity can include suffering, adaptation, survival, and gradual embedding into a new landscape all at once. That complexity is important because the popular image of exile sometimes freezes deported people in a single posture of mourning. Mourning is real, and the spiritual wound is immense. The loss of Jerusalem's temple raises terrible questions. Has the God of Israel been defeated? Has the covenant failed? Is exile punishment, abandonment, or a hidden path toward renewal? These questions reshape religious thought in ways that will echo for millennia. But daily life does not pause while theology struggles. People marry, plant, borrow, lend, learn languages, preserve stories, argue over memory, and raise children who know Babylon not only as the city of conquerors, but as the ground beneath their own feet. This is one of the surprising consequences of empire. By tearing people from one place, Babylon unintentionally helps create traditions of portable identity. When a temple is gone, memory must find other vessels. Text, teaching, law, Sabbath observance, dietary practice, genealogy, prayer, and communal discipline can become more important. Scholars still debate the exact processes by which Judean religion develops during and after the exile, and the evidence remains incomplete. But few doubt that the Babylonian crisis becomes a turning point. Destruction forces interpretation. Exile turns memory into survival. From Babylon's perspective, however, deportation serves order. The empire does not necessarily aim to erase every people it moves. Total erasure would waste skill. A conquered elite can be dangerous at home but useful elsewhere. Craftsmen can build, scribes can write, soldiers can serve, agricultural communities can work fields, priestly or noble families can be detached from old centres of power and made dependent on imperial structures. The empire rearranges human geography the way it rearranges canals, cutting, redirecting, and channeling life towards stability. No single explanation fully accounts for every deportation policy, but the logic is unmistakable. Babylon rules not only land but location. The human cost is hidden beneath the smoothness of that logic. A person uprooted from his ancestral town loses more than a house. He loses graves, landmarks, local gods or sacred spaces, familiar seasons, dialects, neighbours, and the invisible map by which a life makes sense. Even when deportees are not placed in chains forever, the world has been forcibly rewritten. Children grow up between inherited memory and present necessity. Elders carry stories of a place that younger generations may never see. The empire counts workers and households, the displaced count absences. Babylon's own grandeur feeds on such movement. The capital's building programs, temple economies, military demands, and administrative systems require people as much as they require grain and brick. Some labour is local, some seasonal, some dependent, some skilled, some coerced. The empire's beauty is therefore inseparable from its ability to command human bodies across distance. A glazed lion on a wall may seem silent, but behind it are networks of extraction that reach into conquered lands. The city's sacred splendour rests partly on the sorrow of those compelled to serve its order. There is also a deeper religious contradiction. Babylon claims to be the city where divine order is properly maintained, where Marduk's favour confirms kingship, and where the world is renewed through ritual. Yet the very empire that celebrates cosmic order produces human dislocation on a vast scale. To those at the centre, deportation may appear as discipline imposed upon rebellious lands. To the deported, it may feel like the world has been turned upside down by a power that calls its own violence sacred. This contrast gives Babylon its enduring moral charge. It is not only a city of wonders, it is a city where order and suffering are woven together so tightly that later memory cannot separate them. The Judean exile preserves this wound with unusual intensity, and because those traditions survive and spread, Babylon becomes more than a historical empire. It becomes a spiritual image of captivity, pride, and alienation. But that later symbolism should not make us forget the real people inside the event. They are not merely metaphors. They are families adapting to canals and fields under foreign rule. They are scribes preserving names. They are elders remembering a destroyed temple. They are children learning to live in the land of the conqueror. What survives in the record suggests not a simple story of helpless despair, but a long struggle to remain a people when the empire has taken away the place that once seemed to guarantee identity. Babylon may think it has solved rebellion by moving bodies. In the short term, perhaps it has. A city without its elite is easier to control. A people scattered into imperial systems may find revolt harder to organise. But exile creates memories that armies cannot easily kill. It forces conquered people to ask what remains when land, king, and temple are lost. Sometimes the answer becomes stronger than the empire expected. The displaced carry Babylon inside their stories long after Babylon's own political power fades. So the empire built on exile reveals another layer of the dark secret. Babylon tries to rule not only through gods, walls, laws, towers, and omens, but through the rearrangement of human lives. It makes movement a weapon. It turns conquered peoples into labour, tribute, and managed communities. Yet by doing so, it also spreads the memory of its own violence into the future. The city that seeks to make all roads lead to Marduk cannot control what songs, prayers, and histories are born on those roads. In the shadow of Babylon's temples, exile becomes grief, and grief becomes memory, and memory becomes one of the few powers empire cannot command. The fall of Babylon is remembered as if it happens in a single night, under the glow of torches, wine, music, careless laughter, and a warning written by an unseen hand. Later tradition loves the image because it is perfect. The arrogant city feasts while judgment approaches through the dark. The empire believes itself safe behind walls, but destiny has already entered the room. It is one of the most powerful scenes ever attached to Babylon, and like many powerful scenes, it is not the same thing as straightforward history. The real fall is stranger in a quieter way. It is not less dramatic because the details are uncertain. It is more disturbing because it shows how a city can be conquered before its people fully understand that the divine story protecting it has failed. By the mid-6th century BCE, Neo-Babylonian power is no longer as secure as it had seemed under Nebuchadnezzar. The empire still commands wealth, cities, temples, and memory, but the political world around it is shifting. To the east, Cyrus of Persia has risen with startling speed. He's not merely another raider at the edge of the map. He becomes the ruler of a powerful expanding empire, absorbing media and turning Persian strength into a force that changes the balance of the Near East. Babylon's rulers can no longer treat the future as a simple continuation of the past. A new imperial language is forming beyond the horizon. Inside Babylon itself, the reign of Nabonidus creates tensions that later sources present in sharply hostile terms. Nabonidus is an unusual king, remembered for his devotion to the moon god Sin, and for a long absence from Babylon, during which he resides at Tamar in Arabia for reasons scholars still debate. Some explanations emphasize religious preference, others political strategy, trade routes, illness, conflict with Babylon's priesthood, or a combination of factors. The evidence remains incomplete, and hostile propaganda after his fall complicates the picture. Yet one thing is clear: Nabonidus' relationship with Babylon's central religious establishment, especially the cult of Marduk, becomes vulnerable to criticism. In a city where kingship must pass through Marduk's favour, that vulnerability is dangerous. This does not mean Babylon simply collapses from internal decay. Empires rarely fall for one clean reason. Cyrus brings military power, political intelligence, and the ability to present himself as a restorer rather than a destroyer. Nabonidus faces the problem that his legitimacy can be attacked from within Babylonian religious language itself. If the king has neglected Marduk, if festivals have been disrupted, if sacred order has been mishandled, then his enemies do not need to invent a foreign ideology to condemn him. They can say Babylon's own god has judged him. No single explanation fully accounts for the conquest, but the combination of external force and internal theological weakness proves decisive. The famous story in which Babylon falls during a feast belongs especially to later biblical tradition, most vividly in the book of Daniel, where Belshazzar sees a mysterious writing on the wall. Historically, Belshazzar is not the king in the ultimate sense, but the son of Nabonidus, and acts with royal authority while his father is absent. The feast scene is theological literature, not neutral court reporting, yet it captures something real about Babylon's later reputation. The belief that imperial confidence can become blindness. The city that reads omens in the sky fails, in the story, to read the judgment appearing inside its own palace. The irony is too strong to have been forgotten. Ancient accounts of the actual conquest differ. Some traditions suggest that Babylon falls with surprisingly little destruction, perhaps after Persian forces defeat Babylonian armies and enter the city. Herodotus later tells a dramatic version involving the diversion of the Euphrates, allowing troops to enter along the riverbed, though historians treat this with caution. Babylon's massive defences and river setting make such stories memorable, but they may preserve literary imagination as much as fact. The Babylonian Chronicle gives a more restrained picture. Persian forces enter Babylon, and Cyrus later arrives as ruler. What survives suggests not a final burning apocalypse, but a takeover managed with care. That, in some ways, is more chilling. Babylon is not annihilated, it is transferred. For the people of the city, the change may first appear through signs both practical and sacred. Soldiers loyal to another king, officials adjusting allegiance, temples continuing rituals under new patronage, proclamations explaining what has happened, markets reopening. The empire's centre does not become empty overnight. Babylon remains a great city under Persian rule. Its walls still stand, its temples still matter, its scribes still write, its gods still need service. The conquest is therefore not the end of Babylon as a place, but the end of Babylon's claim to independent imperial destiny. That distinction matters. Modern imagination often wants collapse to look like ruins at once, but ancient conquest can leave buildings standing while destroying the story that gave them meaning. The same gate may remain beautiful, the same processional road may still hold footprints, the same temple may still receive offerings, yet the king who enters the sacred drama is no longer Babylon's own. The political centre has shifted. The divine language of legitimacy has been captured by another empire. Babylon survives, but its supremacy does not. The feast before the fall, whether legendary or symbolic, reveals the emotional truth of this moment. Great powers often live inside rituals of reassurance. They repeat ceremonies, titles, and architectural messages that were born in earlier victories. Walls remember the age when they worked. Temples remember kings who honoured them. Inscriptions remember triumphs that no longer protect anyone. By the time danger becomes undeniable, the language of permanence may have become a trap. Babylon had spent centuries perfecting the art of making power look eternal. When change came, eternity had no army of its own. Cyrus understands this. He does not need to present himself as the enemy of Babylon's gods. That would be foolish. Instead, Persian power enters through Babylonian forms of legitimacy. The conquest becomes not merely a military victory, but a theological replacement. Nabonidus can be portrayed as the king who failed Marduk. Cyrus can be presented as the one chosen to restore proper order. This is the deepest reversal in the story. The sacred machinery that once magnified Babylonian kingship now helps legitimize a foreign conqueror. The god behind the throne appears to choose another throne. For those who had suffered under Babylon, the fall must have carried different meanings. Judean exiles and other displaced peoples could see in Babylon's defeat a sign that empires are not invincible. Yet liberation is never simple. Persian rule is still imperial rule, even if it governs differently and allows certain restorations. Some communities may return to ancestral lands. Others remain in Babylonia, where lives have become rooted over generations. The fall of the empire does not instantly heal the wounds the empire created. It only changes the conditions under which memory continues. Within Babylon, priests and elites may have found ways to adapt quickly. Sacred institutions are often skilled at survival. If Cyrus honours Marduk, supports temples, and presents himself as restorer, then continuity can be maintained. The city's religious life need not collapse simply because the dynasty changes. This adaptability is one reason Babylon lasts so long as a cultural and scholarly centre. Its darkest secret is not that it believed in gods too much. It is that its institutions knew how to attach divine meaning to power, even when power changed hands. The fall therefore arrives not as a simple punishment from the sky, but as a cruel demonstration of Babylon's own logic. If kings rule by divine favour, then a successful conqueror can claim favour. If sacred order is proven by political victory, then defeat becomes theological evidence. If Marduk grants kingship, then Babylon cannot easily deny the conqueror who enters, without destroying the city, and then honours Marduk's temple. The system turns against the people who perfected it. So the feast before the fall remains a useful image, even if history is more complicated than the legend. It shows Babylon at the edge of exposure. Behind the music stands fear. Behind the walls stands an army. Behind the ritual language of supremacy stands the possibility that the god may no longer endorse the king. The city that once made conquered peoples walk its roads now watches another power enter its gates. The golden illusion does not shatter into silence. It changes owners. And somewhere in the sacred heart of Babylon, where Marduk's presence had made kings tremble and kneel, the old question rises again with terrible calm: if the gods gave power, who can stop them from taking it away? Cyrus does not need to erase Babylon in order to defeat it. That is the genius of his conquest and the humiliation hidden inside it. A lesser conqueror might have burned the temples, shattered the statues, stripped the city, and announced that Persia had crushed the old gods beneath a new power. Cyrus chooses a subtler path. He enters Babylon as a restorer. He allows the city to keep much of its sacred language, but bends that language toward himself. He does not have to silence Marduk. He lets Marduk speak for him. This is why the Persian takeover feels so unsettling in Babylon's long story. The city's religious system had been built to show that legitimate rule came through divine approval, especially through Marduk's favour. Kings could be judged by whether they honoured the god, restored temples, maintained festivals, protected the sacred order, and ruled with justice. For centuries, this logic strengthened Babylon. It made the city's kings appear as necessary servants of heaven. But once Cyrus controls the city, the same logic can be turned against Nabonidus and used to justify Persian rule. Babylon's sacred machinery does not break. It is reprogrammed. The most famous witness to this transformation is the Cyrus cylinder, a clay inscription written in Babylonian style after the conquest. It presents Nabonidus as a failed king who neglected proper worship and offended divine order, while Cyrus appears as the chosen ruler whom Marduk seeks out to restore peace to Babylon. The text is not a modern declaration of universal freedom, despite later popular interpretations that have sometimes made it sound like an ancient human rights charter. It is royal propaganda in a familiar Mesopotamian form, yet propaganda is not meaningless. It reveals the claims that rulers believed would persuade important audiences. Cyrus, or those writing in his name, understood that Babylon must be won not only by soldiers, but by theology. The cylinder's message is carefully shaped. It does not say that Persian gods have triumphed over Babylon's god. It does not demand that Marduk bow to Cyrus. Instead, it says Marduk looked through all lands for a righteous ruler and called Cyrus by name. This is a brilliant political move. It allows Babylonian elites to accept the new king without admitting that their god has been defeated. Marduk remains powerful. The city remains sacred. The rituals can continue. Only the unworthy ruler has been removed. The conquest becomes an act of divine correction rather than foreign domination. For Nabonidus, this is devastating. His unusual devotion to Sin, the moon god, becomes the central charge against him in hostile texts. He is remembered as someone who elevated the wrong cult, neglected Babylon, disrupted festivals, and failed the god who mattered most to the city's identity. Scholars still debate how fair this portrait is. Nabonidus may have had strategic reasons for his religious policies, and later Persian-backed accounts had every incentive to blacken his name. The evidence remains incomplete, and it is dangerous to treat hostile propaganda as simple fact. But perception can be as politically fatal as reality. In Babylon, if enough powerful voices say the king has lost Marduk, the king's throne has already begun to dissolve. Cyrus's policy toward conquered peoples also strengthens his image. He allows some displaced divine statues and communities to return to their cities, or at least presents himself as doing so in ways that fit Mesopotamian expectations of restoration. This matters deeply because, in the ancient Near East, returning gods to their temples is one of the great acts of legitimate kingship. A ruler who restores divine images can appear as healer of the world. For communities deported or disrupted under earlier empires, Persian rule can therefore look like relief. Even if it remains imperial rule, the conqueror becomes liberator in the language of those who benefit, and restorer in the language of Babylonian tradition. The Judean memory of Cyrus preserves this transformation with particular force. In biblical tradition, Cyrus is remembered as the foreign ruler who permits return and temple rebuilding. This does not mean all exiles leave Babylonia, nor that restoration is simple or immediate. Many remain, because after decades in exile, Babylonia has become home as well as captivity. But the policy marks a profound shift. Babylon had used exile to manage empire. Persia can use return to legitimize empire. Both policies serve power, but they feel very different to those whose lives are being rearranged. Here Babylon's darkest logic reveals itself again. The city had long taught that divine favour explains political reality. When Babylon conquers, Marduk's order seems triumphant. When Babylon falls, Marduk's order can be said to require a new king. The god's authority survives by moving across the surface of events. This is not hypocrisy in the ancient context so much as a flexible theology of power. The gods remain just, so history must be interpreted until their justice can be seen. If a king prospers, he has been chosen. If he fails, he has sinned, neglected, or been rejected. The system is elegant, comforting, and dangerous because it can sanctify almost any successful transfer of power after the fact. For Babylon's priests and scribes, adaptation may have been a matter of survival as much as belief. The temples need protection, rituals need funding, archives need continuity. If Cyrus honours Marduk and leaves institutions functioning, then cooperation can preserve sacred life. Resistance might bring destruction. In that sense, the Persian conquest shows the practical intelligence of ancient religious institutions. They can outlast dynasties by translating continuity into the language of whatever ruler now holds the city. The temple is not powerless, but neither is it pure from politics. It lives between devotion and negotiation. Cyrus also benefits from not making Babylon a martyr. By avoiding unnecessary destruction, he inherits the prestige of the city rather than only its ashes. Babylon remains useful administratively, symbolically, economically, and culturally. Its scribes continue writing. Its temples continue serving gods. Its scholars continue watching the sky. Persian kings can use Babylon's ancient authority to strengthen their own universal claims. Conquest becomes possession of memory. To rule Babylon is to hold one of the great names of the world. Yet something irreversible has happened. Babylon can survive as a city, but it can no longer pretend that its sacred order guarantees political supremacy. The city's own theology has explained its defeat. Marduk has not failed. Babylon's king has failed. This protects the god but wounds the city's pride. The sacred centre remains, but the imperial centre has shifted. The throne behind Marduk is now occupied by a foreign ruler whose power stretches beyond the old Babylonian horizon. There is a quiet tragedy in that survival. Ruin is not always the worst fate for a proud city. Sometimes the deeper humiliation is to continue living under the explanation that your own god preferred another master. Babylon's walls still cast shadows. Its temples still receive offerings. Its people still buy, sell, marry, work, pray, and record transactions in clay. But the story has changed. The city that once told others they had been judged now hears that judgment spoken against its own king. No single explanation fully accounts for why Cyrus succeeded so effectively, but the pattern is unmistakable. Military strength opened the way, political timing weakened resistance, religious diplomacy secured acceptance. Babylon's own sacred language supplied the final seal. The city that tried to rule through the gods discovers that gods are not easily kept loyal to one dynasty. Once divine favour becomes the grammar of power, every victorious ruler will try to speak it. And so Marduk chooses another king, or at least that is how the New Order wants the world to understand it. The phrase is less a window into heaven than a window into imperial intelligence. Cyrus knows that men obey more deeply when conquest can be made to feel like restoration. He knows that temples can stabilise what armies have seized. He knows that a god does not need to be overthrown if he can be persuaded, through inscription and ritual, to bless the conqueror. Babylon's secret has passed into Persian hands, and the city must live with the terrible elegance of its own invention. The secret at the centre of Babylon is easy to misunderstand because later ages have trained themselves to look for something hidden in a more literal way. They imagine a forbidden chamber beneath a temple floor, a sealed tablet describing a lost ritual, a blood oath among priests, a monstrous idol in a dark sanctuary, or a tower built by men who openly declare war on heaven. Babylon attracts such fantasies because it is large enough in memory to hold them. But the true darkness is not so simple, and for that reason it is more enduring. Babylon's darkest secret is that it discovered how to make power appear sacred, how to turn the service of the gods into a system that could organise labour, justify conquest, discipline kings, absorb defeat, and persuade entire populations that political order reflected cosmic necessity. This does not mean Babylonian religion was false in the minds of those who lived within it, nor does it mean priests and kings were merely pretending. That would be too crude. Ancient belief is not a mask placed over politics after the real business is done. It is part of the real business. People live, fear, plant, marry, grieve, fight, and die inside a universe filled with gods, a failed harvest, an eclipse, a plague, a lost battle, a dream, a strange birth, or a broken statue can all feel charged with meaning. Babylon's rulers do not have to invent the sacred from nothing. They inherit a world already thick with divine presence. Their achievement and their danger lies in learning how to organise that presence around the needs of the city and the throne. The pattern has been forming from the beginning. A city rises in the mud of the Euphrates plain, dependent on canals, fields, brick, and disciplined labour. Its survival requires coordination, and coordination requires authority. Then its god rises with it. Marduk, once one divine power among many, becomes supreme in Babylonian theology, not by erasing all other gods, but by gathering them into a hierarchy that places him at the top. The city's growth and the god's growth mirror one another until they seem inseparable. Babylon becomes Marduk's chosen seat, and Marduk becomes the cosmic proof that Babylon matters. Then law enters the structure. Hammurabi shows how a king can present conquest and administration as justice under divine authority. The law stele is not merely a legal document. It is a monument to the idea that the king stands between heaven and society, receiving legitimacy from the gods and translating it into earthly order. The weak are promised protection, The strong are warned. Property, injury, marriage, debt, labour, and punishment are drawn into a royal vision of justice. Yet beneath that vision lies hierarchy, coercion, and the ruler's need to make domination appear beneficial. The evidence remains incomplete for how every court actually functioned. But the ideology is clear. Law becomes one more way power learns to speak calmly. Then the gods themselves become politically embodied. The statues are made alive through ritual, housed in temples, fed, clothed, guarded, and sometimes captured. A city whose god is taken experiences not only military defeat but sacred crisis. A king who restores a god claims not only success but reconciliation with heaven. The statue is holy, but it is also vulnerable to history. Whoever protects it, moves it, returns it, or interprets its absence can shape public meaning. Babylon learns that divine presence, once embodied in sacred objects and institutions, can become part of the machinery through which legitimacy is won or lost. Then architecture enlarges the claim. The ziggurat rises as an artificial mountain in a flatland, a brick-built connection between earth and heaven. Esagila holds Marduk's presence. The processional way stages divine movement. The Ishtar Gate and its sacred beast make entry into the city feel like entry into a world ordered by gods. Under Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon becomes a total environment of authority. Walls, gates, temples, palaces, roads, and inscriptions all tell the same story. This is the centre. This is order. This is the place where heaven touches earth. The beauty is real, but so is the burden behind it. The city shines because resources, workers, captives, and tribute have been pulled toward it from many directions. Then the sky itself is brought into the system. Babylonian scholars watch the stars, record omens, calculate cycles, regulate calendars, and advise kings. Their knowledge is careful and in some ways genuinely scientific, yet it remains bound to the belief that the heavens communicate divine intention. The king rules beneath a sky that must be interpreted. Danger can be read, perhaps answered, perhaps ritually redirected. The universe becomes legible through expert knowledge. Babylon does not command the stars, but it learns to make the stars part of statecraft. Then exile extends the pattern into human geography. Peoples are moved, elites removed, labour redirected, rebellion weakened, and conquered identities forced to survive under foreign rule. Babylon does not only conquer cities, it rearranges the living map of memory. The Judean exile becomes the most famous wound, but it is part of a wider imperial logic. Empire describes its own violence as order. Those who suffer remember it differently. This is where Babylon's sacred image begins to crack most visibly. The same city that claims to maintain cosmic balance produces grief that later generations will name as captivity, arrogance, and judgment. Finally, Babylon falls, and the system reveals its most unsettling flexibility. Cyrus conquers the city and uses Babylonian theology to justify himself. Marduk, the god whose favour once magnified Babylonian kings, is said to have chosen a Persian. Nabonidus becomes the failed ruler, Cyrus becomes restorer. The sacred language does not disappear, it changes sides. The city's own deepest claim becomes the explanation for its defeat. Here the secret stands fully exposed. When power is sanctified by divine favour, victory itself can become evidence of divine approval. The system can bless the new master as smoothly as it blessed the old. No single explanation fully accounts for Babylon's endurance as both place and symbol, but this pattern explains much of its grip on the imagination. Babylon is not remembered only because it was large, rich, or beautiful. It is remembered because it dramatizes a temptation that never entirely leaves human societies, the temptation to confuse order with righteousness, success with divine approval, monumentality with truth, and control with cosmic harmony. Babylon tries to make heaven administratively present on earth. It houses the god, feeds the god, processes the god through the city, reads the god's signs in the sky, writes the god's favour into royal inscriptions, and claims that the king's rule rests upon sacred order. But the more completely power dresses itself in holiness, the harder it becomes to see the human cost beneath the gold. This is why Babylon's darkness is not separate from its greatness. The darkness is inside the greatness. It is in the bricks stamped with royal names, in the temple accounts that turn offerings into institutional wealth, in the festival that humbles the king only to return him stronger, in the captured statue whose absence explains defeat, in the deported family made into imperial labour, in the conquered city told that its suffering belongs to order. Babylon's genius is that it makes domination meaningful. Its danger is that meaningful domination can be harder to resist than naked force. And yet the story must remain balanced. Babylon also preserves knowledge, builds beauty, supports scholarship, refines astronomy, creates legal memory, and leaves behind texts without which the ancient world would be far dimmer. Its people are not villains moving through a moral fable. They are human beings living inside the assumptions of their age, trying to survive floods, kings, taxes, omens, hunger, ambition, and fear. The city's secret is not that Babylonians were uniquely corrupt. It is that they were remarkably successful at solving a problem many powers face, how to make fragile human rule appear anchored in something eternal. That is what makes Babylon feel close even now. Its ruins are ancient, but its logic is not dead. Wherever rulers claim that their order is the natural order of the world, wherever monuments are built to make power look inevitable, Wherever suffering is explained away as necessary for stability, the old Babylonian shadow lengthens. The city tried to rule the gods not by imprisoning them, but by placing them at the centre of a system humans could operate. It reached toward heaven with brick. Ritual, law, exile, and calculation. It did not fully succeed. No city could, but for a time, it came close enough to make the world remember its name with awe and unease. After Babylon loses its empire, it begins another life, one that no army can completely occupy and no conqueror can fully control. The city remains physically real for centuries, still inhabited, still visited, still written about, still important in different ways under Persian, Hellenistic, Parthian, and later memories. But the Babylon that travels farthest is not made of brick. It is made of warning. Once the city becomes a symbol, it can appear in places far from the Euphrates, in texts written by people who never walked its processional road, in sermons, poems, histories, political accusations, and visions of the end of the world. Babylon survives by changing from a capital into an image of power that has forgotten humility. For Judean and later Jewish memory, Babylon is never merely another ancient city. It is the place of exile, the destroyer of Jerusalem, the land where a people must learn how to remain themselves without temple, king, or homeland. Yet that memory is not simple hatred. It contains grief, adaptation, intellectual growth, longing, and a strange kind of intimacy. Babylonia becomes home to major Jewish communities for many centuries. The Babylonian Talmud, produced long after Nebuchadnezzar and Cyrus, carries the name of the land into one of the central bodies of Jewish learning. This creates a deep tension. Babylon is oppressor and school, wound and dwelling place, symbol of captivity and setting for survival. The same name can hold loss and creativity at once. In biblical imagination, Babylon becomes the city that rises too high and falls too hard. The Tower of Babel story attaches to it the theme of human pride and confused speech. The prophets portray Babylon as an instrument of judgment, and then as a power that will itself be judged. The Book of Daniel turns Babylon into a stage where imperial splendor meets divine interpretation, where kings dream of statues, beasts, and kingdoms that cannot last. The Book of Revelation later uses Babylon as a coded and blazing image of corrupt imperial power, usually understood in its immediate context as pointing toward Rome. But drawing emotional force from the older Mesopotamian name, Babylon becomes portable. Any empire can become Babylon if it appears rich, violent, arrogant, seductive, and doomed. This is one of the most remarkable afterlives in history. A city in Mesopotamia becomes a universal symbol for empire at its most spiritually dangerous. The details of Marduk, Esagila, Etemenanki, and the Neo-Babylonian court fade for many readers, but the moral outline remains. Babylon means splendor without righteousness. It means the concentration of wealth, the intoxication of power, the suffering of captives, the arrogance of a city that believes it can touch heaven while ignoring the cries beneath its walls. This symbolic Babylon is not identical to historical Babylon, but it grows from real memories of conquest, deportation, and monumental ambition. The legend distorts, yet it also preserves an emotional truth. Greek writers inherit another Babylon. To them it is a marvel of scale, antiquity, strangeness, and royal excess. Herodotus, Ctesias, and later authors describe walls, gates, customs, gardens, canals, and rulers with varying degrees of accuracy, hearsay, wonder, and exaggeration. Their Babylon is ethnographic and spectacular. It belongs to the geography of marvels, a place where the East appears wealthy, ancient, and difficult to measure. Some accounts preserve valuable glimpses. Others must be treated with caution. Scholars still debate many details from classical descriptions, especially when they conflict with archaeology or Babylonian texts. But the Greek fascination matters because it keeps Babylon alive as one of the great cities of the human past, even for audiences who understand it only through report. Alexander the Great adds another layer to the afterlife. When he enters Babylon in 331 BCE, he is not entering a dead ruin, but a city still capable of receiving a world conqueror. Babylon becomes one of the great stages of his final years. He plans restorations, imagines imperial futures, and dies there in 323 BCE, turning the city into the setting for one of history's most famous deaths. Symbolism is almost too perfect. The Macedonian king who has overturned the Persian Empire dies in the old city that had once been taken by Persia, surrounded by plans too large for one life. Babylon, which had outlasted so many dynasties, watches another master vanish. Yet even Alexander cannot restore Babylon to its old destiny. Later Seleucid foundations, especially Seleucia on the Tigris, draw population and importance away. Political centres shift, watercourses change, temples decline. The old sacred economy loses force. The city does not disappear in a single dramatic moment. It thins, contracts, and becomes less central over time. This slow fading is less satisfying than a sudden catastrophe. But it is often how great cities die, not with one blow, but with 1,000 decisions made elsewhere. A new road bypasses them, a new capital attracts officials, a river changes course, a temple loses income, a generation leaves and does not return. Christian and later Islamic traditions continue to reshape Babylon's name. In Christian writing, Babylon often stands for worldly corruption, opposed to the city of God. In Islamic-era geography and memory, the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia are known, visited and interpreted through new religious and cultural frameworks. Medieval travellers encounter mounds, bricks, stories, and uncertainties. The historical city becomes harder to see beneath layers of scripture, legend, and local memory. People take bricks, ruins become quarries, the great walls and temples, already damaged by time, are reduced further by practical reuse. The city that once stamped royal names into its bricks sees those bricks carried away for humbler buildings. This physical dismantling has its own quiet irony. Babylon's kings stamped inscriptions into brick to make their names endure. Many of those bricks survived precisely because they were reused, buried, broken, or ignored. The monument fails as monument but survives as fragment. Archaeologists much later will read what builders, looters, villagers, and time accidentally preserved. The city's desire for eternal display becomes a puzzle solved from scattered pieces. What survives in the record suggests grandeur, but also loss so extensive that imagination must always work beside evidence. Modern Babylon is shaped by archaeology, nationalism, war, reconstruction, and global fascination. Excavations reveal the Ishtar Gate, processional way, palace complexes, tablets, and foundations that allow a more grounded picture to emerge. At the same time, modern political projects have sometimes tried to claim Babylon's glory, rebuild parts of it, or use its name as a symbol of national antiquity. Such efforts can preserve, distort, or endanger the site depending on how they are done. The evidence of the ancient city is fragile. Mud brick does not forgive careless ambition any more in the modern age than it did in the ancient one. Babylon's symbolic power also spreads through music, literature, political speech, and popular culture. It can mean tyranny, exile, decadence, confusion, forbidden knowledge, or lost grandeur. Sometimes the word is used with little historical understanding only as a shadowy label for oppression. Yet even diluted, the name retains force. Few ancient cities have become so detached from their physical remains while remaining so emotionally recognizable. Babylon is both a place archaeologists can map and a metaphor people continue to summon when ordinary language feels too small for the arrogance of power. The danger, of course, is that symbolic Babylon can obscure real Babylon. The historical city was not a cartoon of evil. It was filled with children, workers, priests, merchants, women managing households and property, scribes learning difficult signs, farmers worrying about water, captives adapting to new lives, and rulers trying to turn fear into permanence. Its people did not wake each morning thinking they lived inside a warning for future civilizations. They lived inside their own necessities. To reduce them to a moral emblem is to repeat a different kind of conquest, stripping their world of complexity. Still, symbols survive because they answer needs. Babylon gives later generations a language for something they keep seeing: the way wealth can become sacred to itself, the way cities can mistake scale for virtue, the way empires can call violence peace, the way rulers can believe their monuments have solved mortality. The ancient city did not invent these temptations, but it gave them one of their most unforgettable forms. Its tower, whether remembered historically or mythically, remains the shape of ambition. Its exile remains the sound of grief under empire. Its fall remains the reminder that sacred language cannot make power permanent. So Babylon's afterlife is not one story, but many layered together. To some, it is the city of captivity. To others, the wonder of the East. To others, the place where Alexander died. To others, the symbol of Rome, corruption, apocalypse, tyranny, luxury, or confusion. Beneath all these versions lie the bricks of a real city on a real plain beside a real river. But above them rises something harder to excavate: the memory of a civilization that tried to make its order feel cosmic and, by doing so, became the name later ages use when they fear that human power has climbed too high. The ruins of Babylon do not speak with one voice. They lie across the land in fragments: mounds, reconstructions, trenches, broken brick, altered watercourses, restored walls, and absences so large they feel almost architectural. To walk through what remains is not to enter the city as Nebuchadnezzar knew it, or as Cyrus entered it, or as exiles remembered it from the edge of grief. It is to enter the aftermath of many Babylons at once. There is the archaeological city, measured and mapped. There is the biblical city, heavy with warning. There is the imperial city of inscriptions. There is the imagined city of towers and gardens. There is the modern site, scarred by excavation, politics, weather, reconstruction, neglect, and war. All of them overlap, and none of them alone is complete. This final Babylon is quieter than the one its kings tried to build. No procession carries Marduk along the sacred road. No priest waits in the temple to humble a king before returning his crown. No astronomer priest climbs into the night with tablets ready to receive the sky. No scribe presses fresh signs into clay for the accounts of a god's household. The old systems have disappeared, not because they were never powerful, but because power is not the same as permanence. The fields, canals, temples, gates, and palaces that once made the city seem like the centre of ordered existence have become evidence. They no longer command obedience. They ask to be interpreted. Archaeology gives Babylon back slowly, and never entirely. Excavators uncover walls, pavements, foundations, inscriptions, tablets, and decorative fragments. They trace the processional way, study the palace complexes, identify sacred precincts, and compare what lies in the ground with what texts claim. Each discovery corrects one legend and sometimes creates another question. The Ishtar Gate, partly reconstructed far from the city with original glazed bricks, reveals the astonishing artistry of Neo-Babylonian state architecture, yet its displacement also reminds us that modern museums have their own imperial histories. The reconstructed parts of Babylon in Iraq show an attempt to restore visible grandeur, yet restoration can blur the line between ancient fabric and modern ambition. The evidence remains incomplete, and in Babylon the incomplete evidence is itself part of the story. The site has suffered from more than time. Ancient brick robbing damaged it. Changing settlement patterns emptied it. Early excavations removed treasures and disturbed context by modern standards. Later political reconstruction placed new walls over old lines and sometimes used the ancient city as a stage for modern identity. Military presence and conflict in recent decades added new layers of harm and controversy. Babylon is therefore not only an ancient ruin. It is a test of how the present treats the past when the past is too famous to be left alone. A forgotten ruin may decay in silence, but a legendary ruin is always in danger of being used. Yet even damaged, Babylon remains powerful because the ground still holds the contradiction that defined the city. It was made of fragile materials and enormous claims, mud brick and cosmic order, canal labour and divine kingship, temple accounts and sacred mystery, human exile and imperial beauty, careful astronomy and political fear, law and hierarchy, restoration and domination. Every surviving wall seems to say two things at once: humans built with astonishing skill. And humans also mistook building for mastery. The city is not a simple warning against ambition, because without ambition there would be no writing, no astronomy, no architecture, no legal memory, no ordered fields in a difficult plain, but it is a warning against the moment ambition forgets its dependence on everything it exploits. What survives in the record suggests that Babylon's rulers understood fragility more than their monuments admit. Why else build so much, restore so often, stamp so many bricks, repeat so many titles, perform so many rituals of renewal? Permanence has to be proclaimed most loudly where decay is most feared. The king who says he has made a wall eternal knows, somewhere beneath the royal language, that walls fail. The priest who repeats the festival knows order must be renewed because it can unravel. The scribe who copies an old omen knows the future remains dangerous. Babylon's confidence is real, but it is never free from anxiety. Its grandeur is built over fear like glazed brick over mud. That fear links Babylon to every civilization that comes after it. Cities still build skylines as declarations. States still use ceremony to make authority feel natural. Governments still surround power with symbols older and larger than individual rulers. Economies still hide labour behind beauty. Empires still describe disruption as stability when they are the ones doing the disrupting. The names change, the gods change, the materials change. But the pattern is familiar enough to make Babylon feel less remote than it should. The ruins are ancient. The temptation is current. Still, Babylon deserves more than condemnation. Its people lived within the possibilities and limits of their age. They inherited older Mesopotamian knowledge and carried it forward. They measured the sky with patience. They preserved mathematical habits that still echo in modern timekeeping. They created literature, rituals, urban forms, archives, and political ideas that shaped the ancient Near East for centuries. They loved, feared, calculated, mourned, adapted, and endured. The city's darkness does not erase its humanity. In fact, it makes that humanity more visible, because the most dangerous systems are rarely built by monsters. They are built by human beings trying to make the world secure, meaningful, and obedient. The city that tried to rule the gods never truly ruled them. It housed them, fed them, dressed them, carried them, interpreted them, and used their names to strengthen kings. It built towers to join heaven and earth, read stars for warnings, and claimed that Marduk's favour could explain the rise and fall of rulers. But the gods of Babylon, whether understood as divine beings, political symbols, or forces of collective imagination, could not be fixed forever to one throne. They could be captured, restored, invoked, transferred, reinterpreted, and remembered against the very city that served them. In the end, Babylon could not control the meaning of Babylon. That is why the ruins feel so charged. They are not only the remains of a defeated empire, they are the remains of an argument about power. The argument says that if a city becomes grand enough, ancient enough, sacred enough, and beautiful enough, it can make its rule seem like the structure of reality. History answers with dust, not immediate dust, not simple dust, not the dust of instant punishment, but the patient dust that waits for every inscription, every wall, every throne, every system that believes it has escaped time. Babylon's final lesson is not that greatness fails because it is great. It is that greatness becomes dangerous when it claims the right to stand above judgment. And now, after all the kings, gods, exiles, towers, omens, laws, conquests, and legends, Babylon lies again beneath the open sky of Mesopotamia. The same sky its scholars watch still turns above the plain. The same sun that hardened its bricks continues to rise. The Euphrates, changed and managed and diminished in ways ancient kings could not have imagined, still belongs to the larger story of water and survival. The city is no longer the gate of the god in the old sense. It is a gate of memory. Through it, the past opens onto a question that remains uncomfortably alive: how much of heaven will humans claim for themselves before time reminds them that they are standing on mud? The last image of Babylon is not a throne, not a tower, not a king standing beneath the approval of a god. It is quieter than that. It is a stretch of earth beneath a wide sky, where broken bricks still remember hands that shaped them, and where the heat of the day settles over remains that once carried the weight of eternity. The city that tried to bind heaven to earth now belongs to wind, excavation, argument, and memory. Its gods no longer pass through its gates. Its rulers no longer kneel and rise in the ritual of renewed power. Its captives, priests, builders, astronomers, and scribes have all vanished into the deep crowd of the dead. Yet the question Babylon leaves behind has not vanished with them. Every civilization builds some version of Babylon, not always with ziggurats, glazed lions, sacred statues, or royal inscriptions, but with the same longing to make order feel permanent. People gather in cities because they are vulnerable alone. They build walls because danger exists. They create laws because violence and greed must be restrained. They look upward because the visible world is never enough. In that sense, Babylon is not strange. It is profoundly human. It is mud shaped into shelter, fear shaped into ritual, memory shaped into writing, and ambition shaped into a skyline. But somewhere along that path, the human need for order can harden into something colder. A city begins by trying to survive, then learns to command. A king begins as protector, then becomes the voice of destiny. A temple begins as a house of reverence, then becomes an engine of wealth and legitimacy. A monument begins as devotion, then teaches people to bow before power. Babylon's darkness lies in that slow transformation, so gradual that those living inside it may not see the moment when sacred order becomes sacred domination. And still, the ruins do not invite only judgment, they invite humility. Babylon created beauty, knowledge, literature, mathematics, astronomy, administration, and forms of memory that still reach across time. Its people were not symbols, they were lives. They cooked meals, feared illness, watched children grow, paid debts, prayed for relief, measured fields, copied tablets, and looked at the same moon that still rises above the plain. Beneath the story of empire is the older story of human beings trying to endure. So Babylon remains, not as it wished to remain, but as time allows anything to remain incomplete, broken, layered, and luminous in fragments. Its greatest towers are gone, yet its warning still stands. No city owns heaven, no empire escapes the earth beneath it, and no power, however sacred it claims to be, can hold back the patient dust forever.